Jung's most dangerous discovery about love wasn't what you think. It wasn't about compatibility. It wasn't about attraction. It wasn't even about understanding men. It was this: men don't fall in love with women. They fall in love with themselves. And the woman who understands this, truly understands it, holds a psychological key so powerful that Jung himself warned against its misuse. Let me be direct. Everything you've been taught about making a man fall deeply in love is backwards. The advice to be more feminine, the strategies to create mystery, the techniques to trigger his masculine instincts, all of it targets the wrong part of his psyche. Because deep love, the kind that makes a man utterly devoted, that transforms him at his core, that makes you irreplaceable to him, doesn't happen at the ego level. It happens in the soul. And Jung discovered something shocking in his clinical practice. The women who created this soul-level devotion weren't doing anything to make it happen. In fact, they were doing the opposite. They were doing one subtle act that every other woman missed entirely. But before I reveal what it is, you need to understand why it works. Because this isn't a manipulation tactic. It's not a seduction technique. It's a psychological phenomenon so profound that when Jung first observed it, he realized he was witnessing the very mechanism of human transformation through love. Here's what he saw. Men walked into his office devastated by breakups, with beautiful women they felt nothing for. They described marriages to perfect wives that left them emotionally dead. They confessed to serial relationships where they experienced intense attraction but never real connection. And then, almost always, they would mention her, the one woman they couldn't forget, the one who haunted them, the one who, in some cases, they'd only met briefly years ago. Jung would ask what made her different. And the answer was never what he expected. Not beauty, not sex, not devotion or submission or any of the feminine qualities men claim to want. The answer was always the same, expressed in different ways. She saw me, but she didn't need me. She understood me, but she didn't try to fix me. She reflected something in me I'd never seen before, but she didn't try to become it. Over decades of clinical observation, Jung mapped this phenomenon. He called it anima projection, and he discovered that the deepest male devotion occurred when a woman unconsciously triggered a man's encounter with his own soul. Not by trying to be his soul, but by being so completely herself that his soul had nowhere to hide. This is the subtle act, authentic self-possession in the presence of his projections. Let me explain what that means, because it's not what it sounds like. Most women, when they sense a man projecting qualities onto them, seeing them as the answer to his emptiness, the source of his happiness, the key to his wholeness, do one of two things. They either try to become what he's projecting, morphing themselves to fit his fantasy, or they reject the projection entirely, pushing him away to maintain their independence. Both responses kill the possibility of deep love. The woman who triggers soul-level devotion does neither. She remains absolutely herself, while allowing him to see his own soul reflected in her wholeness. She doesn't carry his projections, but she doesn't judge them either. She becomes a mirror that shows him who he could become if he integrated what he's been projecting onto her. This creates a psychological crisis in him, and that crisis, if he's capable of it, transforms into irreversible love, because what he's falling in love with isn't actually you. It's the version of himself that becomes possible in your presence. Jung wrote in his private notes, "A man falls in love with his own soul and mistakes the woman who showed it to him for the soul itself. The wise woman knows the difference. She lets him see his soul, but refuses to become it. This refusal is the greatest gift of love, though he may curse her for it at first." Now, I know this sounds abstract, even mystical, But stick with me because we're going to break down exactly how this works, why it works, and most importantly, how to tell if you're capable of it. Because here's the hard truth Jung discovered. Not every woman can do this, and not every man can receive it. This act requires something rare: psychological sovereignty, complete self-possession, the ability to see into a man's soul without losing yourself in what you see. Most women aren't taught this. We're taught the opposite. We're taught that love means merging, adapting, becoming what he needs, filling his emptiness. And when we do that, we create intensity, chemistry, even obsession, but not transformation, not soul-level devotion, not the kind of love that makes you unforgettable. Jung observed that the women who created this deeper love were almost always unconscious of what they were doing. They weren't following a strategy. They were simply being so completely individuated, so whole in themselves, that they naturally catalyzed wholeness in the men who encountered them. And here's where it gets interesting. These women rarely fit the cultural script of femininity. They weren't necessarily the most beautiful, the most nurturing, the most sexually available. In fact, they often confused and frustrated men at first, because they refused to play the game everyone expected. They didn't chase, but they didn't run either. They didn't perform femininity, but they weren't rejecting it. They didn't fill his emptiness, but they weren't cold or withholding. They existed in a psychological space that most people don't even know exists. Self-contained availability, present but not possessed, open but not consumed, reflective but not absorptive. And men who encountered this really encountered it, experienced something that changed them permanently. Think about the last time a man fell deeply in love with you. Not attraction, not infatuation, but the kind of love where he couldn't imagine his life without you, where he became more himself, not less, where he chose you not because you completed him, but because you made his own completion possible. If you've experienced that, you've done this act, perhaps unconsciously. If you haven't, if your relationships feel like constant effort to maintain his interest, if men seem intensely attracted but ultimately distant, if you feel exhausted by performing femininity without receiving real devotion, then you've been doing everything except this one thing. And that's what we're going to change. Over the next 3 hours, I'm going to show you exactly what Jung discovered about the psychology of deep male devotion. We're going to explore the anima, the unconscious feminine soul, in men that drives everything they do in love. We're going to examine why most women inadvertently prevent the very devotion they seek. And we're going to learn the art of anima catalysis, not becoming his soul, but making it possible for him to find his own. This isn't about manipulation. It's about transformation, his and yours. Because here's the final piece Jung discovered. The woman capable of catalyzing this deep love in a man must be doing her own psychological work. She must be individuating, becoming whole, integrating her own masculine and feminine aspects. The subtle act that makes a man fall deeply in love isn't something you do to him. It's something you become through your own individuation. And when you become it, his devotion becomes inevitable, not because you trapped him, but because you showed him his own soul. This is dangerous knowledge. Jung knew it. Because once you understand this, you can never pretend not to know it. You can never go back to the comfort of blaming men, blaming yourself, or following conventional relationship advice. You have to take responsibility for your own wholeness. And that journey is harder than any seduction technique could ever be. But the reward? A love that transcends ego, a devotion that survives crisis, a partnership that catalyzes ongoing transformation for both of you, the kind of love that makes you both more human, not less. Are you ready to understand what Jung discovered? Are you willing to question everything you've been taught about feminine power and male psychology. Then let's begin with the problem, because before we can understand the solution, we need to see exactly what's gone wrong with modern men's capacity for deep love. Jung identified the crisis early in his practice. Modern men are psychologically starving, not for sex, not for success, not even for companionship. They're starving for their own souls. Let me explain what that means. In Jungian psychology, every man possesses what Jung called the anima, an unconscious feminine aspect of his psyche that governs emotional depth, intuitive wisdom, relational capacity, and creative imagination. The anima is not optional. It's not a bonus feature of male psychology. It's the very source of a man's ability to feel, connect, create meaning, and experience love beyond physical attraction. Without anima integration, a man is psychologically incomplete, emotionally numb, relationally superficial, creatively dead, and modern culture has systematically exiled men from their animas. Think about how boys are raised. Don't cry, be strong, logic over emotion, achievement over feeling. Every message a boy receives tells him that the qualities Jung identified as anima, sensitivity, intuition, emotional expression, receptivity are dangerous, feminine, weak, so he buries them, splits them off from his conscious identity, exiles them to his unconscious, and there they remain, festering, demanding attention, seeking expression. This creates what Jung called the anima void, a devastating emptiness at the core of masculine identity that no amount of achievement, conquest, or external success can fill. Men experience this void as a nameless hunger, an aching incompleteness, a sense that something essential is missing, but they have no language for what it is. And this is where women enter the picture, because the unconscious doesn't accept exile permanently. What's buried in the psyche must find expression somehow, and the anima, denied internal integration, seeks external embodiment. This is the mechanism of anima projection. A man unconsciously projects his exiled feminine soul onto women, experiencing through them the emotional depth, intuitive wisdom, and relational capacity he's denied in himself. He doesn't know he's doing this. It feels like attraction, like chemistry, like love, but it's actually desperation. A man trying to access his own soul through someone else's body. And this creates catastrophic relationship dynamics. Listen to how men describe the women they're obsessed with. She makes me feel things I've never felt before. Translation: she's carrying the emotional capacity I've exiled from myself. She understands me on a level no one else does. Translation: she's accessing the intuitive wisdom I refuse to develop. I can't stop thinking about her. Translation: I'm addicted to experiencing my own soul through her presence. This is not love. This is psychological vampirism. The man is using the woman as a life support system for qualities he should be developing in himself. And the woman, mistaking his desperate need for genuine devotion, exhausts herself trying to fill an unfillable void. Jung observed this pattern thousands of times in his practice, and he noted something disturbing. The more disconnected from their animas men became, the more extreme their projections. Some men oscillated between obsessive infatuation, putting women on pedestals as goddesses who held their emotional salvation, and cold detachment once the projection inevitably failed to satisfy the deeper need. Other men became perpetual seekers, moving from woman to woman, always finding the initial rush of anima projection, never staying long enough to face the disappointment when the projection couldn't sustain itself. Still others sublimated the entire mechanism into work, achievement, or addiction, avoiding women altogether rather than face the terrifying need for qualities they'd exiled from their identity. But the most common pattern Jung saw was this: men entering relationships with absolutely no capacity for emotional intimacy, expecting the woman to provide all the relational depth, then blaming her when they felt suffocated by needs they refused to acknowledge as their own. Let me share a case study that illustrates the anima void perfectly. Michael came to Jung at 38, successful in business, handsome, intelligent. He'd been through 4 serious relationships, each ending the same way. He'd meet a woman, feel intense attraction, pursue her relentlessly, win her over, move in together, and then slowly, inevitably, begin to feel absolutely nothing. "It's not that I stop being attracted," Michael explained. "It's that I feel dead inside, like I'm going through the motions of a relationship, but experiencing none of it." Jung asked him to describe his ideal woman. Michael's answer was revealing. Someone warm, emotionally open, who can express feelings easily. Someone intuitive, who understands things without me having to explain. Someone creative and imaginative. Someone who brings color to my life. "In other words," Jung replied, "someone who is everything you're not." Michael looked shocked, then defensive. "I'm not cold. I'm just rational, focused. I can't afford to be emotional in my work." "And what happens," Jung asked, "when you're with a woman who embodies all these qualities you admire?" "At first, it's incredible. She makes me feel alive, like I'm experiencing life in color for the first time. But then," Michael trailed off. "Then what? Then it starts to feel like pressure, like she needs things from me I can't give. Emotional conversations that feel exhausting. She wants me to talk about my feelings, but I don't even know what I'm feeling half the time. She gets frustrated, says I'm emotionally unavailable, and maybe she's right, but I can't fake something I don't have." Jung recognized the pattern immediately. Michael had completely disowned his anima. Every quality he admired in women, emotional depth, intuition, creativity, he'd exiled from his own identity as feminine and therefore incompatible with his masculine self-image. So he projected these qualities onto women, fell into temporary infatuation when they embodied his projection, then felt suffocated when they needed him to reciprocate with his own emotional capacity, which he didn't possess because he'd never developed it. The woman wasn't demanding too much. Michael was asking her to carry his entire emotional life, while he remained a psychological child dependent on her for access to his own soul. This is the anima void, and it's epidemic in modern men. Statistics confirm what Jung observed clinically. Studies show that men report significantly lower emotional awareness than women, struggle more with identifying and expressing feelings, and are far more likely to describe emotional conversations as draining or pointless. Research on relationship satisfaction reveals that women's #1 complaint about male partners is emotional unavailability, precisely the symptom of an unintegrated anima. Neuroscience has even found differences in how men and women process emotion, suggesting that without active development, many men remain emotionally underdeveloped well into adulthood. But here's what makes this truly catastrophic. Most men don't know they have an anima void. It's invisible to them. They experience it as boredom, restlessness, or relationship dissatisfaction, never as their own psychological incompleteness. So, they blame women. She's too emotional. She's too needy. She doesn't understand me. When the truth is, he's emotionally stunted. He's completely dependent, and he doesn't understand himself. This creates 4 devastating patterns in modern relationships. Pattern 1, the anima vampire. A man who is completely unconscious of his anima void forms relationships based entirely on extraction. He needs the woman to feel his feelings for him, intuit his needs, create emotional warmth he can't generate, and basically function as his external emotional processor. Women in these relationships describe feeling drained, like his therapist, or emotionally responsible for both of us. They're not wrong. They're carrying his entire anima function while he remains a psychological parasite. The relationship has intensity because she's doing double the emotional work, but it has no mutuality, no real intimacy, because he's not relating to her, he's feeding off her. Pattern 2, the projection addict. A man who experiences the anima void as a nameless hunger becomes addicted to the initial rush of anima projection. He meets a woman who embodies his exiled qualities, feels that intoxicating alive feeling Michael described, mistakes it for love, pursues intensely, then moves on when the projection inevitably fades. He's not commitment phobic, he's projection dependent. He needs the drug-like rush of finding his soul in a new woman because he refuses to develop it in himself. Women who date these men describe them as intense but inconsistent, all in until they're not, or always searching for something I couldn't give them. What they couldn't give him was his own psychological development, which no woman can provide. Pattern 3, the emotional desert. Some men respond to the anima void by shutting down entirely. They wall themselves off from feeling, relationships, and vulnerability. They pour everything into work, achievement, or solitary pursuits. These men often describe themselves as not relationship people or preferring independence. But Jung recognized this as profound psychological impoverishment. A man living entirely in his conscious masculine ego, cut off from the deeper sources of meaning, creativity, and human connection. Women rarely get close to these men, and when they do, they describe relationships that feel one-dimensional, like dating a robot, or emotionally empty, because they are. These men have exiled 50% of their psychological capacity and called it masculine strength. Pattern 4, the unconscious slave. The most insidious pattern Jung observed was men who formed relationships where the woman became their anima, but neither partner was conscious of it. The man seemed devoted, but it was really dependency. The woman felt needed, but she was actually trapped. These relationships can last for decades. They look successful from the outside, but both partners are psychologically arrested. He never develops his own emotional capacity because she provides it. She never fully individuates because her identity becomes maintaining his projection. Jung called these relationships participation mystique, unconscious psychological fusion where neither person knows where they end and the other begins, and they're prisons disguised as partnerships. So here's the problem in its starkest form. Most modern men have zero anima integration. They're walking around psychologically incomplete, projecting their exiled feminine souls onto women, forming relationships based on extraction or projection rather than genuine intimacy. And most women, not understanding this dynamic, respond in ways that make it worse. They try to fill the void, becoming his emotional caretaker, his intuitive guide, his creative muse, and exhaust themselves maintaining what should be his internal development. Or they try to manipulate the void, using his desperate need to control him, playing games with his projections, creating toxic push-pull dynamics that produce obsession without real connection. Or they take the void personally, feeling not enough when he inevitably can't find in them what he refuses to develop in himself, spiraling into self-doubt and performance anxiety. None of these responses create deep love. They create codependency, manipulation, or mutual disappointment. Because the problem isn't that women need to try harder, it's that they need to understand what's actually happening. A man's anima void is not your responsibility to fill. It's his psychological work to complete, and the subtle act that makes a man fall deeply in love isn't filling his void. It's making it impossible for him to avoid it. That's what we're going to explore next. But first, You need to see exactly what this looks like when it works. You need to witness the moment when a man encounters a woman who refuses to carry his anima and falls into transformative love because of it. Let me tell you about Heinrich and the woman who changed everything. Jung kept detailed notes on a case that haunted him for decades. He returned to it repeatedly in his private journals, trying to understand exactly what had happened, because what he witnessed defied everything he thought he knew about attraction, love, and psychological transformation. The patient was Heinrich, a 34-year-old investment banker from Zurich. Successful, cultured, devastatingly handsome. He came to Jung not because he thought he had a problem, but because his mother insisted, after his fourth broken engagement in 5 years. "I feel nothing," Heinrich told Jung in their first session. I feel attraction, desire, but past that, nothing. It's like I'm playing a role in a play I've seen too many times." Jung recognized the pattern immediately. Severe anima disconnection. Heinrich had built his entire identity around masculine achievement, logic, control, financial dominance, intellectual superiority. Every quality Jung associated with the anima, emotion, intuition, vulnerability, creative spontaneity, Heinrich had not just repressed, but actively despised. "Feelings are for women," Heinrich said dismissively. "My job is to provide, protect, lead. I don't have time for emotional navel-gazing." Jung asked about his relationships. Heinrich described a string of beautiful feminine women who initially fascinated him, then bored him. "They want emotional connection I don't have. They cry about things that seem trivial. They need constant reassurance. It's exhausting." "So you feel nothing for them?" "Correct. It's strange, actually. I can recognize objectively that they're wonderful women, but subjectively, I'm empty." This was the anima void in its purest form. Heinrich had so completely exiled his feminine soul that he was incapable of emotional intimacy. He could perform attraction, courtship, even affection, but he couldn't feel it, not really. Jung noted that Heinrich's disconnection extended beyond relationships. He described his work as meaningless but necessary. His hobbies were ways to pass time. His friendships were networking opportunities. He had no creative pursuits, no spiritual interests, no engagement with art or beauty beyond their investment value. Heinrich was psychologically dead, a walking corpse of masculine achievement with nothing animate inside. And he had no idea anything was wrong. "I'm functional," he told Jung. "More than functional. I'm successful. Isn't that what matters?" "Success without feeling," Jung replied, "is a very expensive form of death." The comment seemed to land. Heinrich sat in silence for a long moment. Then he changed the subject. Analysis continued for several months. Jung attempted to introduce Heinrich to his anima through active imagination exercises, dream work, artistic expression. Heinrich resisted all of it. "I'm not a child playing with crayons. I came here to fix a problem, not explore my feelings." Then something happened that changed everything. Heinrich attended a banking conference in Vienna. At a reception, he met a woman. Jung's notes don't record her name. He called her E. She was an economist presenting research on market psychology. Intelligent, accomplished, attractive. Exactly Heinrich's type. What happened next is documented in Heinrich's own words, recorded during his next session with Jung. "I approached her with my usual strategy," Heinrich explained. "Sophisticated compliment, intellectual observation, subtle dominance. It always works. Women respond to confidence." But E didn't respond the way women usually did. She listened to my compliment, thanked me politely, then asked a question about my actual thoughts on her research. Not flirtation, genuine curiosity. I gave her my analysis. I'd actually read her paper and found it impressive. She engaged with my points, agreed with some, challenged others. It was stimulating. Heinrich pursued the conversation. He increased his charm, made himself more impressive, displayed more of his sophistication, his wit, his worldly knowledge. E remained completely unaffected, not cold, not uninterested, just self-contained. She was fully present in the conversation, Heinrich told Jung, but I had this strange sense that I wasn't affecting her the way I usually affect women. She wasn't performing anything, wasn't trying to impress me back, wasn't angling for my attention. She was just there, engaged but not invested. This intrigued Heinrich more than any woman had in years, because he couldn't categorize her, couldn't predict her, couldn't seduce her with his usual script. The conversation continued for an hour. Heinrich found himself saying things he never said, admitting uncertainties, confessing doubts about his work, small cracks in his performance of masculine certainty. E listened, asked questions, but never reassured him, never tried to fix his doubts, never played the role of nurturing feminine comfort. Then came the moment that changed Heinrich's life. He made a joke, self-deprecating humor about his emotional unavailability, a sophisticated way of acknowledging his limitations while simultaneously deflecting from them, the kind of thing women usually found charming or took as a challenge to break through his walls. E didn't find it charming, and she didn't try to break through. She looked at him with an expression Heinrich later described to Jung as devastating recognition. Not judgment, not sympathy, just seeing. And she said, "You're afraid of the part of yourself that actually feels things." Silence. Heinrich stood there, champagne in hand, surrounded by the noise of 100 conversations, and felt something crack open inside his chest. I wanted to laugh it off, he told Jung, make another joke, change the subject. But I couldn't, because she was right. And somehow, when she said it, I knew that she knew. Not intellectually, she knew. Like she could see straight into the part of me I'd been hiding my entire life. E didn't elaborate, didn't push. She simply held his gaze for a moment, then said, "It was good to meet you, Heinrich," and walked away. She left the conference the next morning. Heinrich never saw her again. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. "It's been 3 weeks," he told Jung in their next session. "I can't get her out of my mind, not the way I usually think about women I'm attracted to. This is different. It's like she reached into my chest and turned on a light I didn't know was there, and now that it's on, I can't turn it off." Jung immediately recognized what had happened. E had done something so psychologically sophisticated that most people couldn't do it if they tried. She had mirrored Heinrich's anima without carrying it. Let me break down exactly what that means. When Heinrich approached E, he was unconsciously projecting his exiled feminine qualities onto her: emotional depth, intuitive wisdom, the capacity to feel. He expected her to respond by embodying these projections, to be impressed by his masculine display, to provide the emotional warmth and nurturing response he couldn't generate himself. E did neither of the things women usually do with male projections. She didn't try to become what he was projecting, performing femininity, being the emotional, intuitive one in the conversation, filling his emptiness with her warmth. And she didn't reject the projection by withdrawing, being cold, distant, or defensive about his approach. Instead, she remained completely herself, grounded, present, engaged, but not absorptive. She met him as an equal, not as a woman trying to receive his masculine energy, but as a human being having a conversation with another human being. This created a psychological vacuum. Heinrich's anima had nowhere to go. He couldn't project it onto her because she wasn't performing the receptive feminine role. But she wasn't rejecting him either, so he couldn't deflect into the "women don't understand me" defense. He was forced to experience his own emotional capacity, or lack thereof, directly. And then E did the most powerful thing possible. She named what she saw, not his behavior, not his defense mechanisms, but the core truth underneath, his fear of his own feeling capacity. In Jungian terms, she gave him a glimpse of his anima, his own exiled feminine soul that held the capacity for emotional depth, intuitive insight, and vulnerable authenticity. And she did this while maintaining complete self-possession. She wasn't trying to save him, wasn't trying to become his anima. She simply reflected what she saw, then walked away, leaving him to deal with the recognition. This is anima catalysis in its purest form. Jung's notes reveal his excitement about this case. E accomplished in one conversation what I've been attempting for months in analysis. She showed Heinrich his own soul, but critically, she did not become his soul. She remained herself. This is the essence of the transformative feminine, not absorption of masculine projection, but reflection that forces integration. The impact on Heinrich was immediate and catastrophic. He couldn't stop thinking about E. But it wasn't infatuation or obsession in the usual sense. It was psychological crisis. "I keep replaying that moment," Heinrich told Jung, "when she said I was afraid of the part of myself that feels. And I realize she's right. I've spent my entire adult life avoiding feeling anything real, building walls of achievement and sophistication to protect myself from what? Vulnerability, weakness, I don't even know." For the first time in analysis, Heinrich began to cry. Not dramatic sobbing, just tears running down his face while he talked, which he barely seemed to notice. "I feel like she showed me I'm not actually alive," he said. "I'm just performing being alive, and now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it." This is the power of anima catalysis. E didn't do anything to Heinrich. She didn't seduce him, manipulate him, or try to change him. She simply existed in such complete self-possession that his projections couldn't stick to her. And in the absence of projection, he was forced to encounter his own soul. And that encounter felt like falling in love. But it wasn't love for E exactly. It was love for the version of himself that became possible in her presence. The authentic, feeling, vulnerable man he'd been avoiding his entire life. Jung worked with Heinrich for 2 more years. The analysis deepened significantly after the Vienna conference. Heinrich began engaging with his dreams, his emotions, his creative impulses. He started painting, badly at first, then with increasing skill and passion. He read poetry. He wept during films. He had authentic conversations with friends for the first time. He was integrating his anima. And here's the fascinating part. Heinrich never contacted E again. He thought about her often, felt immense gratitude for what she'd catalyzed, but he didn't pursue her. "She wasn't supposed to be mine," he told Jung. "She was supposed to show me myself." And she did. A year after the Vienna conference, Heinrich met another woman, Maria, an artist, deeply emotional, intuitive, everything his previous partners had been. But this time, Heinrich didn't experience her as filling his void. He experienced her as a partner in mutual exploration. He brought his own emotional depth, his own intuitive capacity, his own vulnerability, and for the first time in his life, Heinrich felt actual love, not projection, not dependency, not performance, real love. Jung documented the relationship's progress. Unlike Heinrich's previous partnerships, this one deepened over time rather than fading. Arguments led to greater understanding, not disconnection. Maria's emotional needs didn't exhaust him. He had his own emotional resources to meet her with. They married 2 years later. Jung attended the wedding decades later when Jung was compiling case studies for his work on the anima. He contacted Heinrich again. By then, Heinrich was in his 60s, still married to Maria. They had 3 children, all of whom Heinrich described with genuine feeling and pride. "I think about E sometimes," Heinrich told Jung in their final conversation. "Not with regret or longing, with gratitude. She gave me my life back, not by being in it, by showing me what was possible." "And what was possible?" Jung asked. "Feeling things. Really feeling. Being vulnerable without collapsing. Loving someone without needing them to complete me. Being fully human instead of half alive." Jung asked the critical question, "What do you think made E different? Why did she catalyze this transformation when no other woman had?" Heinrich thought for a long moment. "She didn't need anything from me, and she didn't need to be anything for me. She was completely herself, and somehow that made it impossible for me to keep pretending to be someone I wasn't." This is the subtle act that makes a man fall deeply in love. Not seduction, not performance, not filling his void or becoming his fantasy. Complete self-possession that forces him to find his own soul. E likely had no idea what she'd done. She wasn't following a strategy. She was simply being an individuated woman, psychologically whole, not looking to men to complete her, not performing femininity to attract validation. And that authenticity, that groundedness, that self-contained wholeness became a mirror that showed Heinrich what he was missing in himself. The woman who makes a man fall deeply in love doesn't try to be his anima. She refuses to carry it. And in that refusal, she creates the psychological crisis that makes his integration and therefore real love possible. But here's the question. Was this just one case, an anomaly, a lucky accident? Or is there actually science behind what happened to Heinrich? Let's find out. For decades, Jung's anima theory was dismissed as mystical speculation, unprovable, unfalsifiable, interesting but ultimately unscientific. Then modern psychology caught up with him. In the last 30 years, research in attachment theory, social psychology, neuroscience, and relationship science has provided stunning empirical validation of exactly what Jung was describing. The subtle act that makes a man fall deeply in love, authentic self-possession that catalyzes his integration, turns out to be not just psychologically real, but measurable, observable, and backed by hard data. Let me show you the science. The self-expansion model. In 1986, psychologists Arthur Aaron and Elaine Aron proposed self-expansion theory, the idea that people are motivated in relationships by a desire to expand their sense of self, to incorporate new perspectives, qualities, and capacities. They found that the deepest, most lasting romantic love occurs when a partner helps you become more of who you could be, not completing you, expanding you. Sound familiar? This is exactly what Jung described with the anima. A man falls deeply in love with a woman who doesn't fill his void but expands his sense of what's possible for himself. The Arons conducted dozens of studies showing that relationship satisfaction, passion, and commitment all correlate strongly with the degree to which a partner facilitates self-expansion. People who feel they're growing, evolving, and accessing new aspects of themselves through the relationship report the highest levels of love. Critically, the research shows that this expansion must be authentic. Partners who simply reflect back what you already are don't create expansion, and partners who try to change you through criticism or control create constriction, not expansion. The sweet spot, the configuration that creates deep, lasting love, is a partner who embodies qualities you're capable of developing but haven't yet integrated while maintaining their own separate identity. This is anima catalysis in scientific language. When Heinrich met E, she didn't complete his emotional emptiness. She expanded his awareness of his own emotional capacity. She embodied the integrated feminine qualities he'd exiled: emotional depth, intuitive perception, authentic presence, while maintaining such clear boundaries that he couldn't simply consume her embodiment. He had to develop his own. The Aaron's research explains why this creates irreversible attachment. We don't just love people who make us feel good, we love people who make us become more. The neuroscience of recognition. In 2017, a team at UCLA conducted fMRI studies on people experiencing different types of attraction. They showed participants images and descriptions of 3 types of potential partners: physically attractive strangers, people who shared their interests, and people who embodied qualities the participants admired but didn't possess themselves. The brain activation patterns were radically different. Physical attraction activated reward centers, the same areas that light up for food, drugs, or money. Shared interests activated social bonding areas associated with friendship and tribal belonging. But the third category, people embodying aspirational qualities, activated something else entirely: self-referential processing networks. The same brain regions that activate when you think about yourself, imagine your future self, or engage in self-reflection. In other words, when we encounter someone who embodies what we could become, our brains don't just register attractive other person, they register possible self. This is the neural mechanism underlying anima projection. When a man encounters a woman embodying his exiled feminine qualities, his brain literally processes her as a version of himself. But here's where it gets interesting. The researchers did a follow-up study tracking which type of initial attraction led to lasting relationships. Physical attraction faded quickly, unsurprising. Shared interests created stable friendships, but not necessarily romantic depth. The possible self-attraction? It created the most intense initial bonding and, if certain conditions were met, the most lasting relationships. The critical condition: the aspirational partner had to maintain clear boundaries and separate identity. When they merged with the attracted partner or tried to become what the partner wanted, the attraction collapsed. The brain's self-referential processing stopped, and the relationship lost its transformative power. But when the aspirational partner remained clearly themselves, while the attracted partner worked to develop the admired qualities in themselves, the relationship deepened into what the researchers called transformational bonding. Sound familiar? This is exactly what happened with Heinrich. He embodied his exiled emotional capacity, triggering his self-referential processing. That's a possible version of me. But she maintained such absolute boundaries that his brain couldn't simply consume her as other. He had to do the work of becoming. And that work, that integration, creates a bond stronger than any surface attraction. Attachment theory and witnessed authenticity. John Bowlby's attachment theory has dominated relationship psychology for 70 years, but recent extensions of his work have revealed something Jung would have recognized immediately. Research by Mario Mikulincer and Philip Shaver has shown that the deepest attachment bonds, what they call earned secure attachment, form not through consistent caretaking or even through passion, but through something they term witnessed authenticity. This is the experience of being truly seen in your hidden, vulnerable, authentic self, and being accepted, not judged or fixed. Their studies show that moments of witnessed authenticity create neurological bonding stronger than months of surface interaction. One genuine moment of being seen in your truth creates more attachment than 100 pleasant dates. This is what E did for Heinrich. She witnessed his authentic self, the feeling, vulnerable man beneath the sophisticated performance, without trying to fix it, judge it, or merge with it. She simply saw it and named it. That single moment created more psychological bonding than his 5 years of relationships with other women. Mikulincer and Shaver's research reveals why witnessed authenticity triggers what they call safe haven activation in the brain's attachment system. It sends the message, you can be your real self here, you don't have to perform. For men with severe anima disconnection like Heinrich, this experience is revolutionary. Their entire lives have been performances of masculine competence hiding inner emptiness. When a woman sees through the performance without attacking it, something in their nervous system relaxes. I can be real here. And that relaxation, that safety to be authentic, creates bonding that transcends ego. Attraction. But there's a critical nuance the research reveals. The woman providing witnessed authenticity must not need anything from the man's authenticity. If she's trying to fix him, save him, or use his vulnerability to create closeness, the attachment system reads it as manipulation, not safety. True witnessed authenticity is non-attached observation. I see you. I'm not trying to change you. I'm not trying to possess you. I simply see you. This requires tremendous psychological sovereignty in the witnessing person. You can't offer genuine witnessed authenticity if you're desperate for connection, trying to prove your value, or seeking validation through being needed. You can only offer it from wholeness. And men's attachment systems, especially men starved for emotional authenticity, respond to that wholeness with irreversible bonding. Autonomy in long-term relationship satisfaction. Perhaps the most validating research comes from longitudinal studies on what predicts lasting relationship satisfaction. Dr. Terry Orbuch has conducted one of the longest-running relationship studies in psychology, tracking hundreds of couples over 30 years. Her findings directly contradict popular relationship advice. Couples who maintained strong separate identities, pursued individual growth, and refused to merge into we at the expense of I, reported dramatically higher satisfaction over decades than couples who prioritized togetherness, merged finances and identities early, or made the relationship their primary identity. The most satisfied couples after 25+ years. Those where both partners maintained what Orbuch calls autonomous interdependence, connected but separate, supportive but not enmeshed, intimate but not fused. For men specifically, the data is striking. Men in long-term relationships report highest satisfaction with partners who maintain strong self-identity and don't define themselves primarily through the relationship, have their own interests, friendships, and pursuits, independent of the partnership, don't try to fix, manage, or optimize the man's emotional life, remain psychologically self-sufficient rather than needing the man to complete them. In other words, men are most satisfied long-term with women who embody exactly what E demonstrated: self-possessed availability, present but not possessed, connected but not consumed. This contradicts everything conventional relationship advice teaches women. We're told men want to feel needed, want to rescue and protect, want women who make the relationship their priority. The data says the opposite. Men initially respond to neediness because it triggers their provider programming, but long-term, they're most deeply satisfied with and devoted to women who don't need them for psychological completion. Why? Because these women force men to develop their own emotional resources. They catalyze integration rather than enabling dependency. A man might marry the woman who needs him, but he falls deeply, irreversibly in love with the woman who doesn't. The dark side, when projection becomes prison. The research also validates Jung's warnings about projection capture. Studies on codependency and enmeshment show that when one partner becomes the container for the other's disowned qualities, when a woman successfully becomes a man's anima rather than catalyzing its integration, both partners' psychological development arrests. Brain imaging studies show that people in highly enmeshed relationships have less activity in areas associated with self-referential processing. They literally lose neural capacity for independent identity. Relationship researchers call these completed by you partnerships, and they're correlated with every negative outcome: lower satisfaction, higher rates of affairs, increased addiction and depression, and ironically, higher rates of breakup despite seeming more connected, because they're not actually connected. They're fused, and fusion prevents growth. Jung saw this clinically. Modern research confirms it neurologically. The woman who successfully captures a man's anima projection prevents his individuation and her own. They become psychologically frozen, unable to evolve, trapped in roles that feel increasingly suffocating, even as they seem unable to leave. Integration, what the science tells us. When you combine self-expansion theory, the neuroscience of recognition, attachment research on witnessed authenticity, and longitudinal data on autonomous interdependence, a clear picture emerges. Men fall most deeply, most transformatively, most irreversibly for women who embody qualities they haven't integrated, triggering self-expansion and self-referential processing. Maintain clear boundaries, preventing consumption and forcing development. Offer witnessed authenticity, creating safe haven for vulnerable truth. Remain psychologically autonomous, sustaining long-term satisfaction. This is anima catalysis in scientific language, and the research reveals something else Jung understood. This can't be performed. It can't be strategized. Because the moment a woman is trying to be these things to get a specific outcome, she loses the authentic self-possession that makes it work. The brain regions that detect authenticity versus performance are exquisitely sensitive. Men can feel, even if they can't articulate, when a woman is genuinely self-possessed versus performing self-possession to attract them. The science validates what Jung observed. The woman who makes a man fall deeply in love isn't trying to make him fall. She's simply being so completely herself that his soul has nowhere to hide. This isn't a technique. It's a state of being that emerges from your own psychological development, which means before we can learn to catalyze this in men, we need to understand exactly what type of anima we're working with, because Jung discovered that not all men's animas are the same, and the subtle act that works with one type can completely backfire with another. Let me show you the 4 types of anima and how each one falls in love. Jung's most sophisticated insight about the anima was this: it develops in stages. A man's relationship to his inner feminine evolves through 4 distinct levels of psychological maturity, and where he is in this development determines everything about how he experiences love, what he projects onto women, and what kind of relationship he's capable of. Most relationship advice treats all men as psychologically identical. It's catastrophic advice. A strategy that creates deep love with a Sophia stage man will repel an Eve stage man. An approach that works with Helen stage men will bore Mary stage men to tears. You need to know which type you're dealing with, and more importantly, which type you are. Because the anima exists in women too as the animus, and your own development stage determines which men you're attracted to and capable of truly meeting. Let me break down all 4 types. Eve, the primitive anima Jung named the first stage after the biblical Eve, the primordial woman, the mother of life, the source of basic biological and emotional sustenance. Eve stage men experience the feminine purely through primal needs: comfort, nourishment, physical pleasure, maternal care. Their anima is completely unconscious, projected onto women as either idealized mothers or devouring threats. These are the majority of men in modern culture. An Eve stage man has no psychological differentiation between women. He experiences all feminine energy as essentially the same, either good, nurturing, available, comforting, or bad, demanding, overwhelming, abandoning. His relationships are entirely need-based. He wants a woman who makes him feel safe, cared for, physically satisfied. He has no capacity for emotional intimacy because he hasn't developed emotional self-awareness. He wants to be mothered, not met. You can spot Eve stage men easily. They describe women in terms of what women provide them. She makes me feel. She takes care of. She's always there when they have no language for their own emotions beyond good or bad. They're terrified of female anger or disappointment, mother wound. They're either desperate for female approval or defensively hostile to feminine needs. They view relationships purely transactionally. I provide X, she provides Y. Most dating advice is calibrated for Eve stage men. Be feminine, be nurturing, make him feel like a man, provide the comfort and admiration he craves. And it works for creating shallow need-based attachment. But it doesn't create deep love, because Eve stage men aren't capable of deep love. They're capable of dependency. So how does an Eve stage man fall deeply in love? He doesn't until he evolves beyond Eve. But you can catalyze that evolution with the right approach. Unshakable maternal groundedness without mothering him. This sounds paradoxical. Let me explain. Eve stage men are attracted to maternal energy, safety, warmth, nurturance. But if you actually mother them, you trap them in the Eve stage. They become dependent children, not evolving men. The woman who catalyzes an Eve stage man's growth embodies maternal groundedness. She's stable, calm, rooted, not reactive, but she absolutely refuses to take care of him emotionally. She's the earth itself, present, solid, nurturing life, but not bending to his demands or rescuing him from consequences. When an Eve stage man encounters this, he experiences crisis. She feels like mother, safe, grounded, but won't act like mother, fixing, protecting, absorbing his chaos. This contradiction forces him to develop beyond primal need. If he's capable of growth, he begins developing his own emotional ground, his own capacity to self-soothe, his own internal mother, and as he does, he transitions to the next stage. Helen, the romantic anima. Helen, named for Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in mythology, represents the aesthetic, romantic, individualized feminine. Helen stage men have evolved beyond purely maternal projections. They can see women as distinct individuals. They're drawn to beauty, creativity, inspiration. They want a muse, not a mother. These men have developed basic emotional awareness. They can feel desire, fascination, romantic longing, but their anima is still projected. They experience these qualities as belonging to women, not as capacities within themselves. Helen's stage men are the poets, the artists, the romantics. They fall in love with beauty, with inspiration, with the woman who makes them feel creative and alive. You can recognize them. They idealize women, putting them on pedestals. They're drawn to creative, expressive, aesthetically conscious women. They describe love in romantic, poetic language. They want to be inspired, fascinated, transported. They fear being ordinary, boring, trapped in mundane reality. Much modern relationship advice targets. Helen stage men, be mysterious, be beautiful. Be the prize he pursues. Be his inspiration. And again, it works for creating intense attraction. But there's a trap. Helen stage men don't love women. They love the feeling women give them. They're addicted to romantic intensity, to the muse inspiration, to feeling like an artist or a hero. When the woman stops providing that feeling, when reality intrudes, when she has needs, when the romance fades into dailiness, the Helen stage man loses interest. He's not cruel. He's just still projecting. He thinks the magic was in her, so when it fades, He assumes she changed or the relationship is wrong. So how does a Helen stage man fall deeply in love? Through this, embodying beauty and inspiration while refusing to be possessed as a muse object. Helen stage men need to encounter the integrated feminine aesthetic, beauty, creativity, inspiration in its full power. But they need to discover they can't own it, control it, or consume it. The woman who catalyzes Helen stage growth is captivatingly beautiful or creative, but completely self-directed. She creates for herself, not for him. She's inspired by her own inner life, not by his validation. She embodies the muse energy he craves, but she won't perform it on demand or trade it for his devotion. This creates the necessary crisis. He can't capture the magic he seeks. He has to develop his own creative, aesthetic-inspired capacity. If he's capable of growth, he stops trying to possess the muse and starts becoming the artist. He integrates his own Helen, his own capacity for beauty, creativity, and inspiration, and he transitions to Mary. Mary, the spiritual anima. Mary, the Virgin Mary, the Divine Mother, the Holy Beloved, represents the spiritual, transcendent, idealized feminine. Mary stage men have evolved beyond aesthetic romance into spiritual devotion. They experience the feminine as sacred. They want meaning, purpose, transcendence through relationship. These men are emotionally sophisticated. They value depth over beauty, soul connection over physical attraction. They're capable of real devotion, real partnership. But their anima is still partially projected. They put women on spiritual pedestals. They want the woman to be his path to God, his access to meaning, his spiritual teacher. You can spot Mary stage men. They describe relationships in spiritual or soulmate language. They're drawn to wise, emotionally deep, spiritually conscious women. They want to worship, serve, protect the feminine. They fear disappointing their partner or falling short of her spiritual standard. They can be intensely devoted but also become martyrs. Some women love Mary stage men. Finally, a man who values emotional and spiritual depth, who wants real intimacy. But there's still a trap. Mary stage men are devoting themselves to a projection. They've made the woman into a holy object, which means she can't be fully human. She can't have shadow, can't be petty or selfish or wrong, can't have needs that contradict her spiritual pedestal. And the Mary stage man, in his devotion, often neglects his own development. He serves her spiritual path while avoiding his own. So how does a Mary stage man fall deeply in love? Through this, manifesting spiritual depth while rejecting pedestalization. The woman who catalyzes Mary stage growth embodies genuine wisdom, spiritual maturity, and emotional depth, but she absolutely refuses to be worshipped. She shows her humanity, her shadow, her pettiness and selfishness and limitations, not as flaws to apologize for, but as authentic aspects of being human. She says, in essence, I'm not your spiritual teacher, I'm not your goddess, I'm a human doing my own work. If you want spiritual depth, develop your own. This is devastating for Mary stage men. The Holy Beloved reveals herself as human. The spiritual guide refuses to guide. Crisis. If he's capable of growth, he stops seeking transcendence through her and starts doing his own spiritual work. He integrates his own Mary, his own capacity for wisdom, devotion, and spiritual depth, and he evolves to Sophia. Sophia, the integrated anima. Sophia, wisdom herself, represents complete anima integration. The man who has developed his internal feminine to this level is psychologically whole. Sophia stage men are rare, extremely rare. These men have integrated all previous stages. They have maternal self-sufficiency, Eve, creative inspiration, Helen, and spiritual depth, Mary, as internal capacities. They don't need women to provide these things. So what do they want from women? Partnership, challenge, growth, truth. Sophia stage men are attracted to women who are equally individuated, who have done their own work, who can meet them as psychological equals. You recognize them. They value autonomy and expect their partner to value it too. They want to be challenged, not comforted or inspired. They're attracted to strength, competence, and self-possession. They fear stagnation, not loss. They view relationship as a container for mutual individuation, not completion. These men don't need you. That's what makes relationship with them possible. They choose you from wholeness, not need, and they expect the same from you. So how does a Sophia stage man fall deeply in love? Through this, meeting him as a psychological equal who challenges his growth while maintaining your sovereignty. The woman who attracts and keeps a Sophia stage man is fully individuated herself. She's integrated her animus, her internal masculine capacity for logic, assertion, independence, agency. She doesn't need him to complete her. She doesn't need to complete him. They meet as two whole people choosing mutual evolution. She challenges him, points out his blind spots, refuses to accept his bullshit, but she does this from love, not control. From her own commitment to truth, not from needing him to be different, and she maintains absolute sovereignty. She never loses herself in the relationship, never makes him her identity, never stops her own individuation to support his. This creates not crisis, but ongoing dynamic tension. The Sophia stage relationship isn't about one person catalyzing the other's breakthrough. It's about two people catalyzing each other's ongoing growth. It's the rarest form of love, and the most sustainable. So which type are you dealing with? Most men are stuck between Eve and Helen. They want maternal comfort and romantic inspiration, but have no capacity for real emotional intimacy. Some men reach Mary, spiritual devotion without full integration. Very few reach Sophia, psychological wholeness and capacity for equal partnership. Here's how to identify which stage. Ask him, what do you want from a relationship? Eve, someone who makes me feel good, supports me, is there for me. Need-based. Helen, someone who inspires me, fascinates me, makes life feel magical. Feeling-based. Mary, someone who helps me become my best self, who I can devote myself to. Meaning-based. Sophia, someone who challenges me to keep growing, who's doing her own work. Growth-based. Ask him, what happens when you're disappointed in a partner? Eve, withdraws or becomes angry, can't regulate without mother figure. Helen, loses interest or seeks novelty elsewhere, can't sustain without romantic high. Mary, increases devotion and tries harder, can't accept human limitations. Sophia, addresses it directly and adjusts expectations, can hold complexity. Ask him, tell me about a time you were emotionally overwhelmed. Eve, can't answer or describes physical behavioral reaction, no emotional vocabulary. Helen, describes how someone helped him through it. Needs external processing. Mary, describes spiritual practice or meaning-making, intellectualizes emotion. Sophia, describes internal process and what he learned, has emotional sovereignty. Most importantly, notice how he responds to your boundaries. Eve stage, violates them, negotiates them, or withdraws entirely, experiences boundaries as rejection. Helen stage, romanticizes them initially, then resents them when they limit his access, wants the muse available. Mary stage, respects them but feels hurt by them, wants unity, boundaries feel like separation. Sophia stage, appreciates them and maintains his own, understands boundaries enable intimacy. Now, here's the critical question. What stage are you? Because you cannot catalyze growth beyond your own development level. An Eve stage woman, seeking security, defining herself through being needed, cannot catalyze even an Eve stage man's growth. She'll trap him in dependency, A Helen stage woman, performing beauty and mystery, addicted to romantic intensity, cannot help a Helen stage man integrate. She'll keep him in projection addiction. A Mary stage woman, spiritual but still seeking validation through relationship, cannot meet a Mary stage man as equal. She'll create mutual pedestalization. Only a Sophia stage woman, or a woman actively working towards Sophia, can truly catalyze deep love, because only she has the sovereignty, the boundaries, the self-possession required to reflect a man's soul without absorbing it. This is the hard truth most women don't want to hear. The subtle act that makes a man fall deeply in love requires you to have done your own psychological work first. You cannot give what you don't have. But here's the danger. Women who learn about this often make catastrophic mistakes. They try to perform Sophia stage behavior from Eve or Helen stage development. They try to force men's growth before working on their own. And it destroys everything. Let me show you the 5 escalating dangers of getting this wrong. Understanding anima catalysis is dangerous knowledge, because the moment you see how this works, how authentic self-possession triggers deep male love, you face a temptation. The temptation to weaponize it, to perform it, to use it as a strategy rather than becoming it as a state of being. And when women try to manipulate anima dynamics without genuine sovereignty, 5 catastrophic patterns emerge, each one worse than the last. Jung documented these patterns throughout his career. He watched women destroy themselves and their partners by misunderstanding the difference between catalyzing integration and capturing projection. Let me show you what happens when you get this wrong. Danger 1. The anima inflation. This is the most common trap and the most seductive. A woman learns she can embody a man's anima projection. She feels his intense attraction, his devotion, his sense that she's special, magical, the answer to his emptiness. And she believes it. She thinks, I am his anima, I am his soul, I am the source of his depth and meaning. This is anima inflation, identifying with the projection instead of reflecting it. Jung warned this was perhaps the most dangerous psychological position a woman could occupy. Because when you believe you are his soul rather than a catalyst for him finding his own, several things happen. You lose your own identity. Your sense of self becomes dependent on being his source of meaning. You start performing the anima role obsessively, being mysterious when you're actually confused, being deep when you're actually lost, being nurturing when you're actually exhausted. You develop a messiah complex. You believe only you can save him, heal him, make him whole. Other women are too shallow to understand him. You're the special one who sees his true self. You prevent his integration, because if you're convinced you are his soul, you unconsciously block him from developing his own. Every time he starts to integrate his feminine qualities, you subtly undermine it, because his independence threatens your identity as his anima. You become psychologically inflated. Inflation, in Jung's terms, is when the ego identifies with archetypal content. You start believing you possess divine feminine wisdom, that you're spiritually advanced, that you have special insight into masculine psychology. You become grandiose, even as you're actually fragmenting. Jung treated dozens of women suffering from anima inflation. They came to him exhausted, confused about why their deep soul connection had turned toxic. The pattern was always the same. The woman had successfully captured the man's projection. He was obsessed with her. She felt powerful, chosen, special. The relationship had intense highs, moments where he seemed completely transformed by her presence. But she was secretly exhausted. Maintaining the anima projection required constant performance. She couldn't be human, couldn't have needs, couldn't show her shadow. And the man, despite his obsession, wasn't actually growing. Years into the relationship, he was still emotionally dependent, still projecting his depth onto her. still psychologically arrested, both partners trapped, both suffering, neither knowing how to escape. One of Jung's patients, I'll call her Lisa, described it perfectly. I felt like a goddess and a prisoner at the same time. He worshipped me, but I couldn't breathe. I had to be wise and nurturing and deep 24/7. And when I wasn't, when I was petty or tired or just wanted to watch television, I could feel his disappointment, like I was betraying some sacred contract. The relationship ended when Lisa had a breakdown. She couldn't maintain the performance anymore, and when she revealed her ordinary, flawed human self, the man felt betrayed. "Where did the woman I fell in love with go?" he asked. She was never there. Only the projection was there. And Lisa had identified with it so completely, she'd lost herself. This is the danger of anima inflation. You think you're powerful, you're actually dissolving. Danger 2, the performance trap. The second danger emerges when a woman understands projection intellectually but tries to game it strategically. She learns that men project their unlived qualities onto women. So she calculates, I'll embody whatever he's projecting. I'll become his perfect anima. This is the performance trap, constantly shape-shifting to match his projections instead of maintaining your own wholeness. It seems smart, strategic. I'll be mysterious for this man, nurturing for that one, wild for another, whatever triggers his projection most effectively. But there's a catastrophic problem. You can't sustain it. Performed self-possession isn't real self-possession, and male nervous systems can detect the difference, even if consciously he can't articulate it. The performance trap creates a specific relationship trajectory. Phase 1, initial success, weeks 1-8. Your performance works. You've correctly identified his projection and you're embodying it skillfully. He's intensely attracted, pursuing, falling. You feel powerful. This is working. I cracked the code. Phase 2, escalating performance requirements, months 2 to 6. To maintain his projection, you have to perform constantly. You can never break character, can never have needs that contradict the projection, can never be your authentic self. You start feeling exhausted, but you're afraid to stop performing because you think that's the only reason he loves you. Phase 3, authenticity leakage, months 6-12. You can't maintain the performance perfectly. Your real self leaks through. You get tired and show it. You get needy and express it. You get angry and reveal it. And he starts to withdraw. Not because you've done something wrong, but because the projection is cracking. The woman he fell in love with is revealed as a performance. Phase 4, desperate recalibration, year 1+. You try to recapture the projection, perform harder, be more mysterious, more nurturing, more whatever you think he wants. But it's too late. He's sensed the inauthenticity, and his unconscious is screaming, "This isn't real. I'm being manipulated." Phase 5, collapse or explosion. The relationship either ends. Suddenly, he withdraws, possibly into another relationship where he can project fresh, or it continues as a hollow performance where both of you are going through motions. Jung described women caught in the performance trap as psychological chameleons dying of exhaustion. They'd sacrifice their authentic selves trying to be the perfect mirror for male projections. And ironically, it didn't even work. The deep love they sought never materialized because deep love requires genuine encounter, not performance. One patient told Jung, "I've been exactly what every man wanted, and none of them ever really loved me. They loved the character I played, and I don't even know who I am anymore." This is the danger of the performance trap. You think you're being strategic, you're actually losing your soul. Danger 3, the rejection spiral. The third danger emerges from misunderstanding what's happening when a man's projection fails. A woman embodies authentic self-possession. A man projects his anima onto her. She refuses to carry it. He experiences crisis exactly as intended, but then she personalizes his crisis. She interprets his struggle to integrate as her being not enough. This is the rejection spiral, taking his psychological work personally and collapsing into self-doubt. Here's what it looks like. The man is attracted to her groundedness, her depth, her self-possession. He starts projecting his anima. She maintains her boundaries and sovereignty. Perfect so far, but he struggles with integration. Maybe he pulls away to process. Maybe he becomes emotionally volatile. Maybe he seems confused about his feelings. Maybe he dates other women while figuring himself out. And she thinks, I'm not good enough. I'm not feminine enough. I'm not special enough. If I were, he wouldn't be struggling. This is catastrophic misunderstanding. His struggle isn't about her inadequacy. It's about his psychological development. He's encountering parts of himself he's avoided his entire life. Of course he's struggling, but when she takes it personally, several things happen. She loses her sovereignty. She starts trying to make his process easier, smoother, less painful. She starts accommodating his resistance instead of maintaining her boundaries. She begins performing again. Maybe if I'm more understanding, more patient, more supportive, he'll integrate faster. But this defeats the entire purpose. She's trying to mother his growth, which prevents actual growth. She spirals into self-improvement obsession. She decides she needs to become more beautiful, more interesting, more healed, more spiritual, unconsciously trying to become such a perfect anima that he can't help but integrate. She attracts his projection again instead of catalyzing integration. By trying to become what he needs, she recreates the very dynamic she was trying to avoid. Jung treated many women caught in rejection spirals. They'd done everything right initially, maintained sovereignty, refused to carry projection, created space for his growth, then collapsed when his integration process got messy. Why isn't it working? They asked Jung. I did what you said. I stayed myself. But he's not falling in love. He's just confused and distant. Jung would explain, his confusion is the process. His distance is the integration. You think you've failed, but actually, if you can maintain your stance, you're succeeding. But you must not take his struggle personally. It's not about you. This is brutally hard for most women. We're conditioned to believe male withdrawal means we're inadequate. We're conditioned to fix male discomfort. But anima integration requires discomfort, and attempting to alleviate it prevents the very transformation we're trying to catalyze. The rejection spiral typically ends with the woman abandoning her sovereignty entirely, trying to capture his projection to end his struggle, and ending up in danger 1 or 2. Danger 4, the power game. The fourth danger emerges when a woman understands projection dynamics and decides to use them for control. She's not trying to be his anima, danger 1, or perform what he needs, danger 2, or take his process personally, danger 3. She's trying to manipulate his psychology for power. This is the power game, consciously using his projections to create obsession, dependency, and control. It looks like this. She identifies his anima void. She embodies his projection just enough to trigger his attachment. Then she withdraws, creates distance, becomes unavailable. He pursues harder. She intermittently reinforces, giving just enough embodiment of his projection to keep him hooked, then withdrawing again. This creates obsession, but not love, not integration, just toxic, addictive push-pull dynamics. Jung was clear. This is psychological abuse. The woman gaming projection dynamics is creating what modern psychology calls intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive pattern known to behavioral science. She's making herself into a drug he can never quite get enough of. and it works for creating desperate, obsessive attachment. But it destroys both people. For him, he becomes psychologically enslaved. His anima projection intensifies rather than integrating. He's completely unable to develop his own emotional resources because she's weaponized his dependency. He's caught in an addictive cycle that mimics love but is actually trauma bonding. For her, she becomes addicted to the power, the high of having someone obsessed with her, the validation of being needed so desperately. But underneath, she's profoundly disconnected from genuine intimacy. She can't let anyone truly see her because her power depends on maintaining the projection manipulation cycle. Jung treated both victims and perpetrators of power games. The patterns were chilling in their similarity. Women playing power games described feeling powerful but empty. They could make men obsessed, but they'd never experienced real love. They were terrified of being truly seen because their entire identity was built on manipulation. Men recovering from power games described feeling insane. They'd been obsessed with women who seemed perfect but unavailable, devoted but distant, connected but unreachable. The cognitive dissonance had created genuine psychological damage. Jung noted something disturbing. Women who played power games often had histories of being objectified, used, or abandoned by men. The power game was revenge disguised as relationship strategy. "I can make him feel what I felt," one patient told Jung, desperate, never enough, always chasing something just out of reach. Jung's response was direct. "And in doing so, you've become precisely what wounded you. You've transformed from victim to perpetrator. Neither position allows you to heal." The power game creates a specific relationship pattern that can last years. Cycle 1, idealization. She embodies his anima perfectly. He experiences her as magical, special, the answer to his emptiness. Intense honeymoon period. Cycle 2, devaluation. She withdraws, becomes critical, points out his inadequacies. He scrambles to regain her approval. His obsession intensifies. Cycle 3, intermittent reinforcement. She returns just enough warmth to keep him hooked. He experiences relief. His nervous system locks into the cycle. Pain relief, pain relief. Cycle 4, escalation. Each cycle requires more extreme highs and lows to maintain the obsession. The relationship becomes increasingly volatile, toxic, destructive. Cycle 5, inevitable explosion. Eventually, either he breaks completely, depression, rage, sometimes violence, or she gets bored and discards him for a new target. Jung observed that women caught in power games rarely stopped on their own. The addiction to control was too strong. They typically only sought help when they encountered a man who wouldn't play the game, usually a Sophia stage man with genuine sovereignty, and realized they had no idea how to have a real relationship. This is the danger of the power game. You think you're winning. You're actually becoming the very darkness you claim to understand. Danger 5, the soul murder. The fifth danger is the most insidious because it looks like success. A woman successfully captures a man's anima projection. He becomes utterly devoted. The relationship stabilizes. They build a life together. Everyone thinks they're happy, but neither partner can grow. Both are psychologically frozen. Their souls are slowly dying. This is soul murder, the permanent capture of projection that prevents both partners' individuation. Jung considered this the worst possible outcome, worse than obsessive toxicity, worse than power games, because at least those relationships eventually explode, forcing crisis and possibility of transformation. Soul murder relationships continue for decades, comfortable, stable, dead. Here's how it happens. Stage 1, successful projection capture, years 1 to 3. The woman embodies the man's anima beautifully. She provides all his emotional depth, intuitive wisdom, creative inspiration. He's devoted, grateful, utterly dependent. She feels needed, valued, central to his life. She derives her identity from being his emotional, spiritual resource. They're happy. Everyone envies their connection. Stage 2. Mutual arrest. Years 3-7. His psychological development stops. Why would he integrate his anima when she's carrying it so perfectly? Why develop his own emotional capacity when she provides it? Her development stops too. Her identity is so bound up in being his anima that any growth threatening that role feels dangerous. She unconsciously sabotages her own individuation to maintain his need. Neither notices. The relationship is still functioning. They're still connected. Stage 3. The deadening. Years 7-15. Slowly, both partners begin to feel a creeping emptiness. Nothing's wrong, exactly, but nothing feels alive either. He feels numb, going through motions, success without meaning. He might have affairs, not because he's unhappy with her, but because he's desperate to feel something real. She feels exhausted and resentful. Why doesn't he appreciate her more? Why does she have to do all the emotional labor? Why does she feel so depleted? Still, they stay together. Breaking up would require acknowledging something's deeply wrong. And they've built too much, kids, home, social identity, to face that. Stage 4. The prison. Years 15+. The relationship becomes a prison neither can escape. He's completely dependent on her for any emotional capacity. She's completely dependent on his need for her identity. They've murdered each other's souls while appearing to love each other. Jung described these relationships as mutual psychological prisons disguised as partnerships. He treated people who'd been in them for 20, 30, even 40 years. The tragedy was that both partners had once been on the verge of transformation. The initial dynamic, his anima projection meeting her sovereignty, could have catalyzed both their individuations, but instead of maintaining boundaries and forcing integration, she'd captured the projection, and he'd gratefully arrested his development. Now they were both trapped, growing old together while remaining psychologically infantile. Jung observed something heartbreaking. Often one partner would begin to wake up in midlife. Usually the man when his unlived life became too painful to ignore. He'd have an affair or a breakdown or a spiritual crisis, and the woman would feel betrayed. After everything I've given him, but what she'd given him was the very thing preventing his wholeness. And what he owed her, his own development, he'd never paid. Soul murder relationships typically end in one of three ways. Ending 1, late life affair. He finally seeks his unlived feminine qualities in a new projection. The wife feels destroyed. I gave him my best years. The affair might lead to divorce or shameful secret, or return to the dead marriage with added resentment. Ending 2, mutual deterioration. Both partners slide into addiction, depression, or illness. Their unlived psychological content manifests as physical mental disease. They stay together in shared suffering until death. Ending 3, wake up and rupture. One partner begins genuine individuation, often through therapy or crisis. The relationship cannot survive because it was built on arrested development. Divorce in later life is devastating but necessary. Very rarely, Jung saw a fourth possibility. Both partners simultaneously wake up and commit to mutual individuation, but this required extraordinary courage and luck. One of Jung's most powerful warnings was about soul murder. To capture another's projection may seem like love. It may feel like devotion, but if it prevents their individuation, it is the deepest betrayal possible. You're keeping them psychologically imprisoned while calling it care. The pattern across all 5 dangers. Notice what all 5 dangers have in common. They all involve trying to manage his anima projection rather than maintaining your own wholeness. Anima inflation. You identify with his projection performance trap. You adjust yourself to his projection rejection spiral. You take his projection struggle personally. Power game. You manipulate his projection for control soul murder. You capture his projection permanently. The subtle act that creates deep love, authentic self-possession, requires none of these. You don't identify with his projection. You don't adjust to it. You don't take it personally. You don't manipulate it. You don't capture it. You simply remain yourself, completely, unshakably. And that stance, that unwavering sovereignty, either catalyzes his integration or reveals he's incapable of it. But maintaining that stance requires something most women haven't developed: your own psychological wholeness. You cannot reflect his anima if you're still seeking your own. You cannot maintain boundaries if you're desperate for validation. You cannot refuse to carry his projections if you don't know where you end and he begins. This is why Jung developed a specific solution, a practice, a way of being that makes anima catalysis not just possible, but inevitable. Let me show you what he discovered. After decades of clinical observation, Jung distilled the process down to its essence. The woman who makes a man fall deeply in love isn't doing something. She's being something. She's embodying what Jung called individuated feminine presence. This isn't a technique. It's not something you can perform or strategize. It's a state of being that emerges from your own psychological development. But it has a structure, a process, 3 distinct movements that create the conditions for anima catalysis. Jung called them the mirror, the boundary, the invitation. Let me break down each one. Movement 1, the mirror. The first movement is becoming a clear, accurate reflection of his inner world, without distortion, without judgment, without absorption. Most women either reflect nothing, remaining opaque, mysterious, unknowable, or they reflect everything, becoming so empathetic they lose their own perspective. Neither creates transformation. The mirror movement requires seeing him accurately, truly, beneath his ego performance into his actual soul. This means developing what Jung called active perception, the ability to observe psychological content without getting caught in it. When a man performs masculine competence while being terrified of vulnerability, you see both. You don't just accept the performance or judge the fear. You hold both truths simultaneously. When he projects romantic idealization onto you, you recognize it as his unlived Helen stage, not as truth about you. You don't become inflated by his idealization or deflated by its inevitable disappointment. When he's emotionally shut down while hungry for connection, you perceive the contradiction without trying to resolve it for him. This is the mirror, clear seeing without rescuing. How do you develop this capacity? Practice shadow recognition. Jung discovered that you can only see clearly in others what you've acknowledged in yourself. If you haven't faced your own contradictions, you'll either miss his or get triggered by them. Spend time each day examining your own psychological contradictions. Where do you perform confidence while feeling insecure? Where do you claim independence while secretly wanting to be taken care of? Where do you judge qualities in men that you've disowned in yourself? Write them down, sit with them. Don't try to fix them, just see them. As you develop comfort with your own contradictions, you develop the capacity to witness his without reactivity. Practice projection differentiation. Learn to distinguish between what's actually him and what he's projecting onto you. When he says you're the most intuitive person he's ever met, pause. Is that true? Or is he projecting his own undeveloped intuition? When he says you're so emotional, pause. Is that accurate, or is he projecting his disowned feelings? Keep a journal of his descriptions of you. Note which ones feel true to your experience and which feel like projections. This develops your ability to reflect accurately without absorbing his content. Practice non-attached witnessing. The hardest part of mirroring is remaining non-attached to what you see. When you witness his fear, your instinct is to comfort. When you witness his rage, your instinct is to defend. When you witness his emptiness, your instinct is to fill. Practice witnessing without intervening. Start with strangers. Observe people in public spaces. See their psychology without needing to respond to it. Then practice with him. When he reveals vulnerability, breathe. Witness it. Acknowledge seeing it. But don't rush to fix, comfort, or make it better. I see your struggling with this is mirroring. Let me help you feel better is absorption. The mirror shows him his soul. It doesn't carry his soul for him. Movement 2, the boundary. The second movement is maintaining impermeable psychological boundaries, so he cannot merge with you, possess you, or make you his external anima. This is where most women fail. They confuse boundaries with walls. Walls are defensive. They keep people out because you're afraid of being hurt, consumed, or lost. Boundaries are sovereign. They define where you end and others begin because you know who you are. The difference is critical. A woman with walls says, I won't let you see my vulnerability because you might use it against me. A woman with boundaries says, I'm choosing to share my vulnerability, but my well-being doesn't depend on your response to it. Walls create distance. Boundaries create safety for intimacy. The boundary movement requires knowing yourself so completely that you cannot be merged with, manipulated, or confused with someone else's psychological content. How do you develop this? Practice the sovereignty check. Every morning before interacting with anyone, do this inventory. Close your eyes, feel into your body. Ask, what's actually mine right now? Notice which emotions feel native to you, arising from your own experience, and which feel absorbed from others. Notice which thoughts feel like your own consciousness, and which feel like internalized voices, parents, culture, partners. Notice which needs feel authentic to you, and which feel like you should have them. Then consciously return what's not yours. Imagine handing back absorbed emotions, releasing internalized voices, letting go of false needs. This practice, done daily, develops the psychological muscle of differentiation. You learn where you end and others begin. Practice the not mine response. When he shares something emotionally intense, pain, anger, fear, desperation, practice this internal response. I see this, I acknowledge this, but this is not mine to carry. Say it silently to yourself. Feel the truth of it. You can witness his pain without absorbing it. You can acknowledge his anger without defending against it. You can recognize his fear without making it your responsibility. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. You're creating space for him to have his experience without you becoming entangled in it. Practice needs clarification. Get radically clear about what you actually need versus what you've been conditioned to think you need. Most women have internalized messages like, you need a man to feel complete, you need to be needed, you need to make others happy. These aren't needs, they're cultural programming. Your actual needs might be solitude, creative expression, intellectual stimulation, physical movement, spiritual practice, authentic connection. Make a list of your true needs. Commit to meeting them yourself or through multiple sources, never through one person alone. This prevents you from needing him to complete you, which maintains the boundary essential for anima catalysis. Practice the integration test monthly. Assess whether the relationship is maintaining healthy boundaries or sliding into merger. Merger warning signs. You can't tell if an emotion is yours or his. You feel responsible for his psychological state. Your well-being depends on his mood. You've abandoned activities, friendships, interests to focus on him. You feel like you're losing yourself. You're afraid to express needs that might displease him. Healthy boundary signs. You can feel empathy without taking on his emotions. You recognize his struggles aren't your responsibility to fix. Your well-being is internally generated, enhanced, but not determined by him. You've maintained your separate life. You feel more yourself, not less. You can express authentic needs without fear. If you're sliding into merger, boundaries need strengthening immediately. This might mean more time apart, saying no to things you've been agreeing to, or actively reclaiming aspects of yourself you've let go. Movement 3. The invitation. The third movement is creating space for his anima integration without demanding it, manipulating it, or making your love conditional on it. This is the most subtle and powerful movement. After mirroring his soul and maintaining your boundaries, you create an invitation. Your wholeness is possible. I see it, but only you can choose it. Most women either demand growth. You need to work on your emotional availability, or they enable stagnation. I accept you exactly as you are while secretly carrying his unlived development. Neither creates transformation. Demanding growth creates resistance. The more you push, the more he defends his current state. Enabling stagnation prevents growth. If you're carrying his anima function, he has no motivation to develop it himself. The invitation is different. It's holding space for possibility without attachment to outcome. How do you create this? Practice the Socratic method. When he shares something revealing his anima disconnection, I don't really feel things deeply. Don't correct, judge, or try to teach. Ask questions that invite self-reflection. What would it be like if you did? When's the last time you remember feeling something deeply? What do you think would happen if you let yourself feel more? You're not leading him to answers. You're opening space for him to explore his own psyche. Practice modeling integration. The most powerful invitation is living your own integration. When you embody emotional depth without being overwhelmed by it, he sees it's possible. When you access intuitive wisdom while maintaining rational clarity, he sees both can coexist. When you express vulnerability without collapsing, he sees strength and softness aren't opposites. You become living proof that integration is possible, not by telling him to change, but by being what integration looks like. Practice celebrating his attempts. When he makes any move toward integration, expressing a feeling, trusting his intuition, allowing vulnerability, acknowledge it without making it about you. Wrong. Finally, you're opening up to me, makes it about your needs, right? I noticed you accessed something real just then, makes it about his development. Wrong. See, I told you that you could feel things, makes you the expert, right? How did that feel being that honest? Invites his self-awareness. You're celebrating his integration, not your success at producing it. Practice non-attached patience. This is the hardest practice, waiting without attachment to timeline or outcome. His anima integration might take months, years, or it might never happen. He might not be capable of it at his current development stage. You remain open to the possibility without needing it to occur. This requires absolute trust in yourself. I'm complete with or without his integration. If he chooses growth, beautiful. If he doesn't, I'm not diminished. This non-attachment is paradoxically what creates the safest space for his growth, because he's not performing for your approval or resisting your demands. He's choosing for himself. The three movements together. Here's what it looks like when all three movements operate simultaneously. He shares something that reveals his anima disconnection. Let's say he dismisses his own sadness about his father's death. I don't see the point in crying about it. He's gone. Move on. Mirror, you see both his genuine grief and his defense against it. You hold both truths without trying to fix either. I hear that you want to move on, and I also sense there's grief there that hasn't been felt. Boundary, you don't absorb his grief and cry for him. You don't take on his emotional processing. You remain yourself, capable of acknowledging his pain without carrying it. That grief is yours to feel or not feel. I'm not going to push you to process it. Invitation. You create space for possibility without demand. If you ever want to explore what you're feeling about your father, I'm here. And if you don't, that's okay too. This three-part response does something extraordinary. It shows him his own soul mirror, refuses to carry it for him, boundary, and makes space for him to reclaim it, invitation. Most women would do one of three things instead: absorb. Oh, honey, I'm so sad for you. Let me comfort you. It's okay to cry. Taking on his grief, mothering him, preventing his own emotional reckoning, judge. You really should process that. It's unhealthy to suppress grief. Demanding growth, creating resistance. Enable. You're right, no point dwelling on it. Colluding with his defense, preventing growth. None of these create transformation. They create dependency, resistance, or stagnation. The three movements, mirror, boundary, invitation, create the only conditions under which he can genuinely integrate his anima, seeing his soul, being unable to project it onto you, and having safe space to develop it himself. The central paradox. Here's what makes this so psychologically powerful. You're offering him the most intimate connection possible, true seeing of his soul, while maintaining the most absolute separation, refusing to carry his soul for him. This creates unbearable psychological tension for him. He can't merge with you. He can't possess you. He can't make you his external anima. But he also can't dismiss you, forget you, or walk away unaffected, because you've shown him something he cannot unsee, his own potential wholeness. This tension forces a choice: integrate or flee. If he integrates, if he begins developing his own anima rather than projecting it, he falls into transformative love. Not love of you as his savior, but love of you as the catalyst who made his wholeness possible. If he flees, if he cannot face the work of integration, he moves on to easier projections, women who will carry his anima for him. And you've lost nothing because he wasn't capable of the love you deserve. This is the art of anima catalysis, creating conditions for transformation while remaining completely unattached to whether he transforms. It requires extraordinary self-possession, psychological sovereignty, radical self-trust. Most women aren't ready for it. They want guarantees, strategies that work, techniques that make him fall in love. But anima catalysis offers no guarantees, only possibility. You become the woman who makes deep love possible. Whether any particular man chooses that possibility is entirely up to him. And your peace with that uncertainty, your groundedness in your own wholeness regardless of his choice, is what makes you capable of catalyzing transformation in the first place. This is Jung's solution, not a technique, a way of being. But don't take my word for it. Let's look at what happens when women fail to embody this versus when they succeed. Let's examine the historical contrasts, the catastrophic failures and the stunning successes. History is littered with love stories, but when you understand anima dynamics, you can see which relationships were built on projection capture versus anima catalysis. The contrast is devastating. Let me show you two failures and two successes. Relationships that teach us exactly what happens when women either trap men's projections or catalyze their integration. Failure, example 1. F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald. Scott Fitzgerald was a brilliant writer with severe anima disconnection. He had no access to his own creative feminine energy, the source of imagination, emotional depth, spontaneous expression. Then he met Zelda, wild, creative, uninhibited. Everything Scott's repressed personality wasn't. He fell obsessively in love, not with Zelda as a person, with Zelda as his externalized creative soul. Here's what Scott wrote about Zelda. I married the heroine of my novels. He literally saw her as the embodiment of his creative feminine imagination. And Zelda, young, eager to be special, thrilled by his obsession, became his anima entirely. She performed wildness for him, spontaneity, creative chaos. She became the muse that fed his writing while abandoning her own artistic development. Initially, it seemed to work. Scott wrote his greatest novels drawing on Zelda's personality, her diary entries, her expressions. She was the raw material for his art, but Jung would recognize this immediately as anima capture leading to mutual destruction. Scott never developed his own creative feminine capacity. He remained dependent on Zelda to access imagination, emotion, spontaneity. Without her, he couldn't write. And Zelda, serving as his external anima, lost herself completely. She tried to develop her own art, but Scott was threatened by it. He needed her to be his muse, not her own person. The result, Zelda had a complete psychological breakdown, schizophrenia, multiple hospitalizations, institutionalization for much of her life. And Scott deteriorated into alcoholism, creative block, and early death. Both destroyed by anima dynamics neither understood. Jung's assessment would be clear. Zelda captured Scott's projection instead of reflecting it. She became his creative feminine soul, rather than forcing him to develop his own. The intensity was extraordinary. The love seemed deep. But it was really mutual psychological vampirism. Scott drained Zelda of her creative energy to fuel his art. Zelda shaped herself entirely around his projection, losing her independent identity. Both became increasingly psychotic as their unlived selves demanded recognition. They couldn't leave each other. They were too enmeshed. But they couldn't thrive together. The dynamic prevented both from individuating. This is what happens when a woman successfully becomes a man's anima. It looks like passionate love. It's actually shared destruction. Success. Example 1. Leonard and Virginia Woolf. Leonard and Virginia Woolf's relationship couldn't have been more different. Virginia suffered severe mental illness, what we'd now call bipolar disorder with psychotic features. She had episodes of complete psychological disintegration. Leonard could have easily tried to fix her, to be the stable masculine container for her chaotic feminine energy, to make her dependent on him for psychological survival. He didn't. Instead, Leonard did something extraordinary. He created structures that protected Virginia's creative work while maintaining absolute boundaries around his own psychological space. He managed practical life, finances, publishing, household, not to control her but to free her for creative depth. But he never tried to manage her inner experience. When Virginia was psychotic, Leonard ensured physical safety, but he didn't try to make her sane. He didn't shame her chaos or demand she be different. When Virginia was depressed, Leonard provided practical support. But he didn't try to fix her feelings or take responsibility for her happiness. And critically, Leonard maintained his own separate life, his own political work, his own writing, his own psychological space. Virginia was never his anima. She was his partner, fully herself, even in madness. And Virginia, despite her illness, maintained extraordinary psychological sovereignty. She never made Leonard responsible for her well-being. She never demanded he complete her or fill her emptiness. They were two whole people, both flawed, both struggling, choosing mutual support without merger. The result, Virginia produced some of the most psychologically sophisticated, literature in English. Leonard built a publishing house and political career that influenced a generation. Both grew, both individuated. The relationship sustained them without arresting them. They were together for 29 years until Virginia's suicide, which, tragically, was likely inevitable given her illness severity. But Leonard didn't cause her madness by capturing her projection, and Virginia didn't cause his stagnation by becoming his anima. Jung would recognize this as genuine partnership, two individuating people supporting each other's wholeness without demanding completion. Failure example 2. Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath. Ted Hughes was a poet with a powerful but unintegrated masculine energy, intense, controlling, emotionally remote. Sylvia Plath was brilliant, sensitive, emotionally volatile, and desperately seeking a masculine container for her chaos. They married quickly, passionately, and immediately fell into toxic anima-animus dynamics. Sylvia tried to become Ted's anima, the emotional, intuitive, vulnerable feminine he'd disowned. She poured her rage, her sensitivity, her creative darkness into poems that often explicitly served his creative vision. And Ted tried to become Sylvia's animus, the controlled, powerful, masculine force that could contain her emotional storms. Neither worked. Both were performing archetypal roles rather than individuating. Sylvia became increasingly depressed and suicidal, partly due to her own psychological vulnerabilities, but intensified by serving as Ted's emotional container while he remained distant and unavailable. Ted became increasingly controlling and unfaithful, seeking his anima in multiple other women, while demanding Sylvia continue providing emotional intensity for his creative work. The dynamic was psychological murder. Sylvia was carrying Ted's entire emotional life, while he refused to develop his own capacity for feeling, and Ted was providing false masculine strength while actually being emotionally impotent. Sylvia killed herself at 30. Ted was haunted by guilt for the rest of his life, writing poem after poem trying to make sense of what happened. Jung would see it clearly. Ted never integrated his anima. He projected it onto Sylvia, then onto his mistress Assia, who also later killed herself, then onto subsequent partners. He spent his entire life seeking his own soul in women's bodies, and Sylvia never developed her own internal masculine, the structure, boundaries, and psychological containment that could have held her emotional intensity without needing Ted to provide it. Both needed the other to complete them, and that need destroyed them both. Success example 2. Carl and Emma Jung's own marriage is perhaps the most instructive example of anima catalysis, precisely because it wasn't perfect. Emma Jung maintained such absolute self-possession throughout their 52-year marriage that Carl couldn't fully project his anima onto her, even when he desperately wanted to. When Carl fell into his midlife crisis, the break with Freud, the descent into the unconscious documented in the Red Book, he was psychologically unstable, possibly psychotic. Emma's response was remarkable. She didn't try to save him. She didn't try to become his anima, providing all the emotional depth and intuitive wisdom he was discovering in his visions. Instead, she maintained the external life, raising their 5 children, managing finances, while Carl did his internal work. She was present but not absorbed, connected but not fused. And critically, Emma began studying analytical psychology herself. She became a scholar, a therapist, a writer on anima-animus dynamics. She wasn't Carl's emotional support system. She was his intellectual equal, pursuing her own individuation. During this period, Carl began a relationship with Tony Wolfe, a patient who became his colleague and lover. Tony embodied Carl's anima in ways Emma wouldn't and couldn't. Emma could have dissolved, could have demanded he end it, could have tried to compete by becoming his anima herself. She didn't. She maintained her boundaries, continued her own work, remained present in the marriage without making Carl's psychological process her responsibility. This forced Carl to integrate. He couldn't permanently externalize his anima in Tony because Emma's sovereignty made him aware he was projecting, and he couldn't merge with Emma because she refused to become his anima. He had to do the work himself. The result? Carl Jung developed the most sophisticated psychological theory of the anima, precisely because his wife wouldn't carry it for him, and his lovers couldn't permanently contain it. He was forced to integrate, and that integration made him the psychologist who transformed human understanding of love, soul, and psychological development. Emma never gets credit for this. History focuses on Carl's brilliance and scandalously on his affair with Tony, but Jung's own writings make clear Emma's unshakable sovereignty, her refusal to be either the only anima or the rejected anima, catalyzed his transformation. Years after Emma's death, Jung wrote, "She was the foundation, not because she supported me, but because she remained so completely herself that I had nowhere to hide from my own depths." This is anima catalysis at the highest level. Emma didn't make Carl fall in love. She made his soul evolution possible, and that made his love for her deep, complex, and ultimately transformative for both of them. The pattern, notice the difference? Failures. The woman becomes the man's anima, Zelda, Sylvia. He never integrates, she loses herself. Both deteriorate or die. Successes. The woman remains herself, Virginia, Emma. The man must face his own depths. Both grow. The relationship sustains individuation. The failures look more romantic, more passionate, more classically in love. The successes look more complex, more boundaried, less conventionally passionate. But the failures end in destruction, and the successes create lasting depth. This is what women need to understand. The relationship that feels most intense isn't always the healthiest. Sometimes intensity is just enmeshment disguised as love. And the relationship that requires most sovereignty, most boundaries, most separate identity, might actually be the deepest love. Because real love supports both people's wholeness. Fake love requires one person to sacrifice themselves for the other's projection. But understanding this intellectually isn't enough. You need to see how Jung himself learned this lesson, through his own near destruction and eventual transformation. Let me show you Jung's own struggle with the anima, and how it taught him everything he would later teach the world. Between 1913 and 1919, Carl Jung nearly went insane. He experienced visions of blood flooding Europe. He heard voices, he had conversations with figures from his unconscious that felt more real than his waking life. He was terrified he was becoming psychotic, that he'd end up institutionalized like the patients he treated. But he made a decision that changed psychology forever. Instead of suppressing these experiences, he'd engage them, document them, learn from them. This became the Red Book, Jung's private journal of his descent into the unconscious, filled with paintings and dialogues with archetypal figures. And at the center of this descent was a figure he simply called the soul, a feminine presence who both tormented and guided him, who revealed truths he didn't want to see, who demanded he integrate everything he'd split off from his conscious identity. This was Jung's encounter with his own anima, and it nearly destroyed him. But it was also Emma Jung's finest hour, because her response to Carl's crisis became the template for everything Jung would later teach about anima catalysis. Let me tell you what happened. The crisis begins in 1913. Jung broke with Freud, his mentor, father figure, and intellectual partner, for 6 years. The break was devastating. Jung lost not just a professional relationship, but his primary masculine identification. Without Freud as the father authority to relate to, Jung's psychological structure collapsed. He had defined himself in opposition to and alignment with Freud's ideas. Now he had to discover his own. This triggered what Jung later called his confrontation with the unconscious. He began having visions. In October 1913, he saw in his mind's eye a monstrous flood covering Europe, turning to blood, with thousands of corpses floating in it. The vision repeated for weeks. At first, Jung thought he was having premonitions of war. This was before World War I. But when the war actually started, he realized something else was happening. His unconscious was erupting. His inner world was flooding his consciousness. And at the center of this flood was a feminine figure. Jung's journals describe her appearing in various forms, sometimes as a young woman, sometimes as a blind old woman, sometimes as a composite figure that seemed to contain all feminine possibility. She spoke to him, argued with him, challenged his every assumption about himself. Jung named her anima in his writings, but in the Red Book he often called her simply the soul. And she was merciless. The soul's demands. The soul told Jung things he didn't want to hear. She said his entire identity as a rational scientist was a defensive construction, that he'd exiled feeling, intuition, and imagination to build a masculine persona acceptable to the medical establishment. She said he'd been living half a life, thinking thoughts but not feeling feelings, analyzing others but not knowing himself. She demanded he paint, though he had no artistic training, write poetry, though he considered it frivolous, engage in what he later called active imagination, deliberate dialogue with unconscious figures. Jung resisted. "This is madness. I'm a scientist, a psychiatrist. I don't paint. I don't play with fantasies." The soul's response, recorded in the Red Book, "Then you will remain dead, a living corpse of rationality with no access to life." Jung was terrified, because part of him knew she was right. He'd built his entire career on analysis, logic, scientific method, but he'd sacrificed the very qualities that made life meaningful: spontaneity, creativity, emotional depth, spiritual connection. His anima, his internal feminine soul, was demanding integration, and the demand was so strong it was manifesting as psychological crisis. This is exactly what Jung would later observe in his patients. The anima, when split off too completely, doesn't stay silent. It erupts, creates symptoms, forces confrontation. For Jung, the eruption was catastrophic because he'd split off so much. Decades of masculine-only development, no emotional life, no creative expression, no spiritual practice outside of intellectual interest. The soul was his entire unlived life, demanding recognition. Emma's impossible position. While Jung was descending into the unconscious, Emma was managing the external world. 5 children, a household to run, a husband who was increasingly unstable, spending hours in his study painting bizarre images and writing dialogues with invisible figures. Emma could have responded in several predictable ways. She could have tried to rescue him, bringing in doctors, demanding he stop this nonsense, trying to pull him back to rationality. This would have arrested his integration and possibly destroyed him. She could have collapsed herself, falling apart under the weight of his crisis, demanding he take care of her instead of exploring his unconscious. This would have forced him to suppress his process to maintain the household. She could have left, deciding she didn't sign up for a husband who might be going insane, taking the children and seeking stability elsewhere. This would have abandoned him at his most vulnerable moment. Emma did none of these. Instead, she did something extraordinary. She maintained absolute normalcy in the external world while giving him complete freedom for his internal work. She kept the household functioning. She raised the children. She managed finances. She maintained social appearances. But she didn't make Carl's crisis about her. She didn't demand he fix his instability. She didn't try to save him from his process, and critically, she began her own study of analytical psychology. Emma didn't become Carl's anima. She began integrating her own animus, developing her own intellectual rigor, her own analytical capacity, her own psychological understanding. She was becoming whole while he was falling apart. The Toni Wolff complication. In 1914, Jung began a relationship with Toni Wolff, a former patient who had become his colleague. Toni was 25, beautiful, emotionally intense, intellectually brilliant, and she embodied aspects of Jung's anima that Emma wouldn't or couldn't. Toni was willing to enter Jung's visions with him, to engage the unconscious material as if it were real, to be the companion in his descent that Emma refused to be. Jung fell into what appeared to be obsessive love. He spent increasing time with Toni, brought her into his work. May have been sexually involved. Historians still debate this. Emma knew. How could she not? And here's where Emma's response becomes the ultimate demonstration of anima catalysis. She didn't fight for Carl. She didn't try to compete with Toni. She didn't try to become the mystical, anima-embodying woman Carl seemed to need. She maintained her boundaries, continued her own work, remained in the marriage without demanding Carl choose. This drove Jung crazy. In his journals, he writes about wanting Emma to be his anima, to enter the depths with him, to be his sole companion. But Emma's refusal, her absolute maintenance of her own path, forced Jung to realize something critical. He was projecting onto both women. Toni embodied his intuitive, emotional, mystical anima. Emma embodied his grounded, intellectual, structured anima. He wanted to merge with both to avoid integrating these qualities himself. But Emma's sovereignty made merger impossible, and Toni, despite her willingness to enter his visions, couldn't permanently contain his anima either. She was a real person with her own psychology, not a projection screen. Jung was forced to do the work himself. The integration process. The Red Book documents Jung's integration process in painful detail. He had to dialogue with his soul, the anima figure, repeatedly, learning to hear her wisdom without letting her possess him, learning to integrate her qualities without losing his masculine consciousness. In one dialogue, the soul tells him, "You can't love me by making me external. You can only love me by making me internal. I am not a woman you meet. I am the woman you become." This was Jung's breakthrough insight. The anima isn't something to find in women. It's something to integrate in yourself. He began painting compulsively, accessing creative imagination he'd denied his whole life. He wrote poetry. He engaged in what he called active imagination, deliberately entering altered states to dialogue with unconscious figures. Slowly, painfully, Jung integrated his anima. He developed emotional depth, intuitive wisdom, creative expression, spiritual connection, and as he did, his relationship with Emma deepened in unexpected ways. He no longer needed her to be his soul. He was developing his own. This allowed him to see Emma as she actually was, not as a projection, but as a fully individuated woman pursuing her own development. Their marriage became a genuine partnership, not merger, not projection, but two whole people supporting each other's ongoing individuation. The relationship with Toni continued in some form for decades, but Jung's desperate need for her as anima carrier dissolved. She became a colleague, possibly a lover, but not the container for his soul. The Red Book's ultimate lesson. The Red Book wasn't published until 2009, decades after Jung's death. He considered it too personal, too raw, too revealing of his near-psychotic descent. But it contains the most important psychological insight Jung ever had. The anima confrontation is the central task of masculine individuation, and it requires a crisis that cannot be avoided. Men will try every trick to avoid their animas, project them onto women, suppress them with work, deny them with logic, sublimate them into art or spirituality. But the anima will not be denied. Eventually, she demands integration, and that demand creates crisis. The question isn't whether a man will face his anima, it's whether he'll do it consciously, through deliberate inner work, or unconsciously, through breakdown, addiction, affairs, or psychosis. Jung was lucky. He had the psychological sophistication to engage his crisis consciously. He had Emma's unshakable groundedness to maintain external stability. He had the courage to descend into madness and return with wisdom. Most men aren't so lucky. They project their animas onto women and never retrieve them. Or they suppress their animas until midlife, when the suppressed content erupts catastrophically. And most women don't have Emma's capacity to maintain sovereignty while their partner disintegrates and rebuilds. What Emma taught Jung years later, after Emma's death in 1955, Jung wrote about what she'd given him. She never became my anima, she remained herself. And in remaining herself, so grounded, so clear, so impossible to possess, she forced me to find my own soul. I wanted her to be my depths. She refused, and that refusal saved my sanity and made my work possible. This is the ultimate validation of anima catalysis. Emma didn't make Carl fall in love by being his anima. She made his transformation possible by refusing to be his anima. She embodied the three movements perfectly. The mirror. She saw Carl's process, understood its necessity, acknowledged its reality without getting caught in it. The boundary. She maintained her separate life, her own work, her psychological sovereignty, while remaining present in the marriage. The invitation. She created space for his transformation without demanding it, controlling it, or making it about her. And Jung fell deeply, permanently, transformatively in love with her, not because she completed him, but because she made his completion possible. He wrote, "A man falls in love with the woman who shows him his soul, but he stays in love with the woman who refuses to become his soul." Emma was that woman, and her capacity to be that woman emerged from her own individuation, her own integration of masculine and feminine, her own psychological wholeness, her own commitment to truth over comfort. This is what Jung learned from his crisis. Real love requires both people to be whole. Projection creates intensity but prevents intimacy. And the woman who catalyzes a man's deepest transformation is the one who maintains such complete self-possession that his soul has nowhere to hide. But understanding this intellectually still isn't enough. You need to know how to practice it daily, in real relationships with real men. Let me show you the practical tools Jung developed to cultivate anima catalytic capacity. Jung's profound insights mean nothing if they remain abstract. You need practical, daily practices that develop the psychological sovereignty required for anima catalysis. These aren't techniques to make him fall in love. They're practices that develop your own wholeness, which naturally creates the conditions for deep love. I'm giving you 5 practices. Each one targets a specific aspect of individuated feminine presence. Do them daily. They will change not just your relationships, but your entire psychology. Practice 1. The sovereignty check. Every morning before you interact with anyone, do this psychological inventory. The purpose. Identify where you've lost sovereignty, where you're carrying emotions, problems, or unlived qualities that belong to others. The process. Sit quietly, close your eyes, take 3 deep breaths. Ask yourself, what am I carrying that isn't mine? Scan through these areas. Emotions. Notice what you're feeling. For each emotion, ask, is this actually mine? Did it originate from my experience, or did I absorb it from someone else? You'll notice some emotions feel native, arising naturally from your own life. Others feel foreign, like you picked them up from a partner, family member, or friend. Thoughts. Notice your mental content. Ask, are these my thoughts? Or am I thinking someone else's thoughts for them? You might notice you're rehearsing conversations for him, planning his life, worrying about his problems, thinking through his decisions. These aren't your thoughts. They're his thoughts you've taken on. Needs. Notice what feels urgent or important. Ask, is this actually my need? Or am I performing a need I think I should have? You might notice you need to be in a relationship, to be needed by him, to make him happy. But these feel more like obligations than authentic desires. Responsibilities. Notice what you feel responsible for. Ask, is this actually my responsibility? Or have I absorbed responsibility for things outside my control? You might notice you feel responsible for his emotional state, his growth, his happiness, his choices. The return. For everything that isn't actually yours, consciously return it. Visualize handing back absorbed emotions. I return this sadness to you. It's yours to feel or not feel. Release internalized thoughts. I release these worries. They're your problems to solve. Let go of false needs. I don't actually need to be needed. I release this. Return inappropriate responsibilities. Your happiness is your responsibility. I return it to you. Feel the lightness as you reclaim your psychological territory, the commitment. Before opening your eyes, state clearly, today I remain in my own psychological space. I'll witness others clearly, but I won't carry their content. This practice, done daily, develops the sovereign boundaries essential for anima catalysis. You learn to be present without being consumed, available without being absorbed. Practice 2. The projection journal. When you experience intense emotions about him, especially reactions that seem disproportionate to what actually happened, immediately journal using this format. The purpose: distinguish your authentic feelings from his projected content you're carrying. The process: write out what happened objectively, just facts. He said X, I felt Y. Then ask these questions. Is this emotion too big for the situation? If he canceled plans and you felt devastated rather than just disappointed, that's a signal you might be carrying something beyond your own reaction. Does this emotion feel familiar from my past? If the feeling reminds you of childhood, previous relationships, or patterns you've had before meeting him, it might be your triggered wound rather than a reaction to his actual behavior. Is this emotion actually about me, or is it something I'm sensing in him? Sometimes you feel anxious because he's anxious, but you've absorbed his anxiety instead of recognizing it's his. Sometimes you feel sad because he's suppressing sadness. You're feeling what he won't feel. Am I trying to fix, rescue, or manage his emotional state? If your impulse is to make him feel better, solve his problem, or take responsibility for his mood, you're likely carrying his anima function. The pattern recognition. Over weeks of journaling, you'll see patterns. I consistently feel responsible for his anger, but it's his anger. I absorb it and try to manage it. I feel his sadness more intensely than he does. I'm carrying what he won't feel. I feel anxious about his work problems, which are entirely his to solve. These patterns show you exactly where you're losing sovereignty and carrying his projections. The practice. Once you identify a projection you're carrying, consciously release it. I see that I'm feeling his suppressed grief. I return this to him. His grief is his to feel. Then redirect to what's actually yours. My feeling is compassion for his struggle, and clarity that it's his work, not mine. This practice develops the differentiation essential for maintaining boundaries while remaining empathetic. Practice 3. The feminine wholeness meditation. Anima catalysis requires embodying integrated feminine wholeness, all 4 stages, not just one. Most women unconsciously specialize in one anima stage based on their conditioning. This meditation develops all four. The process: sit comfortably, close your eyes, breathe deeply. Eve, grounded Mother Earth. Visualize yourself as primal ground, solid, stable, nurturing without effort. Feel your connection to body, to earth, to instinct. You are the foundation. You don't have to do anything. You simply are. Affirmation: I am grounded presence. I nurture life without losing myself. Notice, women who are all Eve without the other stages become mothering and lose boundaries. Women who reject Eve become ungrounded and anxious. Develop Eve, your capacity to be calm, stable, embodied presence without taking responsibility for others' needs. Helen, inspiring beauty. Visualize yourself as aesthetic power, creative, expressive, captivating without performing. Feel your connection to beauty, imagination, inspiration. You are artistic expression. You create for yourself, not for validation. Affirmation: I am creative power. I inspire through authenticity, not performance. Notice, women who are all Helen without other stages become addicted to romantic intensity and male attention. Women who reject Helen become overly serious and disconnected from beauty. Develop Helen, your capacity to embody beauty and creativity while remaining self-directed, not performing for male gaze. Mary, spiritual depth. Visualize yourself as sacred wisdom, deep, meaningful, devoted to truth. Feel your connection to spirit, to meaning, to transcendence. You are spiritual commitment. You honor the sacred without pedestalizing others. Affirmation: I am spiritual depth. I seek meaning without making others my God. Notice, women who are all Mary without other stages become spiritually inflated and judgmental. Women who reject Mary become cynical and meaning-starved. Develop Mary, your capacity for spiritual depth and devotional practice directed at truth itself, not at making a man your spiritual path. Sophia, integrated wisdom. Visualize yourself as complete wholeness, all three previous stages integrated into sovereign wisdom. You contain grounded presence, Eve, creative beauty, Helen, and spiritual depth, Mary, but none of them defines you. You are the integration itself. Feel your capacity to hold complexity, paradox, contradiction without needing to resolve it. Affirmation: I am integrated wholeness. I contain multitudes without fragmentation. Notice, Sophia is the goal, integrated feminine that includes body, beauty, spirit, and wisdom without being limited to any single expression. Develop Sophia, your capacity to access all stages fluidly, responding authentically to each moment rather than performing a fixed feminine identity. The integration. Open your eyes. Notice how embodying all four stages feels different from specializing in one. You're not just grounded, Eve, not just creative, Helen, not just spiritual, Mary. You're whole, Sophia. This wholeness is what makes anima catalysis possible. You reflect all aspects of the feminine, so he can't capture just one aspect as his anima. Practice 4. The conscious reflection. When he reveals vulnerability, projects qualities onto you, or displays anima disconnection, practice the 3 movements in real time. The purpose: respond in ways that catalyze integration rather than enabling projection. The process: step 1, mirror, acknowledge what you see. Reflect his truth back without judgment, inflation, or minimization. Wrong. You're so brave for sharing that. Inflating, making it about impressing you. Wrong. Everyone feels that way sometimes. Minimizing, normalizing away his specific truth. Right? I hear that you're afraid of emotional intimacy. Simple, clear mirroring. Right? I notice you become distant when things feel too close. Accurate observation. Step 2. Boundary. Refuse to carry what isn't yours. Make clear that his experience is his, not yours to fix or absorb. Wrong. Let me help you work through that fear. Taking responsibility for his process. Wrong. I promise I'll never hurt you. Absorbing his fear by trying to guarantee safety. Right? That fear is yours to explore. I can't resolve it for you. Clear boundary. Right? I'm not responsible for managing your fear of intimacy. Explicit differentiation. Step 3. Invitation. Create space for his own work. Open possibility for him to integrate without demanding or controlling it. Wrong. You really should work on that in therapy. Demanding growth. Wrong. I can wait forever for you to be ready. Making yourself his patient waiting room. Right. If you want to explore where that fear comes from, that's your choice. Invitation without attachment. Right? I'm here for authentic connection. If and when you're capable of that, we can see if this works. Clear about your needs while leaving his timing to him. Example, exchange, him. I don't think I'm capable of the kind of deep emotional connection you want. Mirror, I hear that you doubt your capacity for emotional depth, reflecting without judging. Boundary, your emotional capacity is yours to develop or not develop. That's not my responsibility. Refusing to rescue or fix. Invitation, I'm interested in genuine connection with someone doing their own emotional work. If that's not you right now, that's important information for both of us. Clear about needs, non-attached to outcome. This response does something powerful. It validates his truth, maintains your sovereignty, and creates space for his choice without trying to make him change or accepting a relationship that doesn't meet your needs. Practice 5, the integration test. Every week, assess whether the relationship is catalyzing mutual individuation or sliding into projection capture. The purpose, catch yourself if you're abandoning sovereignty or enabling his stagnation. The process, set aside time alone. Review the week honestly. Red flags, merger and codependence. I can't tell if emotions are mine or his. I feel responsible for his mood, well-being. I've abandoned activities I love to focus on him. But I'm anxious when we're apart. I need him to validate my worth. I'm performing to maintain his interest. I feel like I'm losing myself. I'm afraid to express authentic needs. His problems occupy my thoughts constantly. I feel exhausted maintaining the relationship. If you checked 3+ boxes, you're losing sovereignty. Emergency boundaries needed. Green flags, healthy catalysis, and I can feel empathy without absorbing his emotions. I recognize his struggles aren't mine to fix. I've maintained my separate interests, friendships. I feel grounded whether we're together or apart. My self-worth comes from within. I'm authentically myself, not performing. I feel more myself, not less, in this relationship. I express needs freely without fear. I'm interested in his growth but not attached to it. I feel energized by our connection. If you checked 7+ boxes, you're maintaining sovereignty. Continue this stance. The correction, if you're sliding into merger, take immediate action. Increase time apart, reinvest in separate activities. Practice saying no to his requests. Stop thinking about his problems for him. Journal to differentiate your feelings from his. Consider whether this relationship serves your individuation. If you're maintaining sovereignty but he's not growing, assess whether he's capable of the work required. Consider that his current development stage might not match what you need. Remember that catalyzing his integration isn't the same as guaranteeing it. Be willing to let him go if he consistently chooses projection over integration, the 5 practices together. These aren't one-time exercises, they're a daily discipline. The sovereignty check grounds you each morning. The projection journal processes intense moments. The feminine wholeness meditation develops your range. The conscious reflection applies the work in real time. The integration test keeps you honest weekly. Together they develop the psychological capacity for anima catalysis. You become so grounded in your wholeness that you naturally reflect men's souls without carrying them. This isn't manipulation, it's maturation. You're not trying to make him fall in love. You're becoming the kind of woman who makes transformation possible for him and for yourself. And that transformation creates a specific arc, a predictable progression from projection crisis to integrated love. Let me show you the 5 stages of how a man transforms when he encounters genuine anima catalysis. When a man encounters authentic anima catalysis, when he meets a woman who embodies individuated feminine presence and maintains absolute sovereignty, he goes through 5 predictable stages. Understanding this arc is critical because each stage requires a different response from you. Push too hard or collapse too soon, and you sabotage the transformation. Let me show you exactly what happens at each stage. Stage 1. The projection crisis. The first stage begins the moment he encounters your self-possessed presence. He experiences something he can't categorize. Intense attraction, yes, but different from usual attraction. Deeper, more unsettling, more threatening to his ego structure. What's happening in him? His unconscious recognizes you as embodying his unlived anima qualities. Emotional depth, intuitive wisdom, authentic presence. His system is desperate to project onto you, to make you his external soul. But you're not playing the usual role. You're not performing to capture his interest. You're not accommodating his projections. You're not available for possession. This creates cognitive dissonance. Every instinct tells him to either capture you or dismiss you, but he can't do either. His behaviors, testing. He'll test your boundaries repeatedly, expecting emotional reactions, accommodations, or performances. When you don't provide them, he's confused. Pursuing, he's intensely drawn to you, wants more time, more access, more intimacy, but he can't articulate why. There's just something about you. Withdrawing, periodically pulls back to regain control. Your self-possession threatens his ego. He needs distance to process. Idealizing might put you on a pedestal. You're different from other women. This is projection ramping up. Criticizing might suddenly find flaws. You're too independent. You're intimidating. This is ego defending itself. What he's thinking, why can't I figure her out? Why do I care so much what she thinks? Why does she affect me like this? Why doesn't she need me the way other women do? Your response, do. Maintain absolute consistency. Your self-possession isn't a game or a strategy. It's who you are. Don't waver when he tests, pursues, or withdraws. Don't chase when he withdraws. Perform when he tests. Get inflated by his idealization or defensive about his criticism. The key, you remain yourself, present but not pursuing, available but not accommodating, interested but not attached. This stage typically lasts 1 to 3 weeks for men with any psychological sophistication. For less developed men, it might last months, or they might flee entirely. Stage 2, the recognition. If he doesn't flee in stage 1, he moves into the most critical stage, devastating self-recognition. There's a moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes gradual, when he sees what's actually happening. What's happening in him. The projections start to crack. He begins recognizing that what he's attracted to in you are qualities he's exiled from himself. Your emotional depth reflects his lack of emotional capacity. Your groundedness reflects his chronic anxiety. Your creative spontaneity reflects his rigid control. Your spiritual connection reflects his empty achievement focus. This recognition is devastating because it reveals his fundamental incompleteness, the moment. Often there's a specific moment of clarity. Maybe you express a feeling authentically and he realizes he can't. Maybe you set a boundary and he realizes how much he needs you to not have boundaries. Maybe you demonstrate intuitive wisdom and he realizes how cut off he is from his own inner knowing. Something cracks, and he sees himself through your mirror. His behaviors, increased vulnerability. He might start sharing feelings he's never shared, not performing vulnerability to impress you, but actually cracking open. Shame. He feels inadequate. I'm not good enough for you. This isn't fishing for reassurance. It's genuine recognition of his undevelopment. Defensiveness. His ego might fight back. You think you're so evolved, attacking you to avoid facing himself. Fascination. He's increasingly obsessed with understanding you, not to conquer you, but to understand what you have that he doesn't. Decision point. He's facing a choice: integrate or flee, grow or find easier projections. What he's thinking: she sees parts of me I've never seen. I feel more alive around her, but also more inadequate. I want to be the kind of person who could actually meet her. I'm terrified I'm not capable of what she's showing me is possible. Your response: do. Witness his recognition without rescuing him from it. Mirror what you see. I notice you're facing something real. Don't make his growth about you. This isn't about being good enough for me. It's about whether you want to become whole for yourself. Don't rush to reassure him he's fine as he is. Try to make his integration easier or faster. Take his shame or defensiveness personally. The key: this is his crisis, not yours. Your job is to remain stable, mirroring, boundaried, inviting, while he decides whether to do the work. Some men flee here. They choose easier relationships where they don't have to face themselves. This is valuable information. He's telling you he's not capable of the depth you're offering. Others commit to the work, and that's when real transformation begins. Stage 3. The integration struggle. If he chooses integration over flight, stage 3 is the hardest period for both of you. He's attempting to develop qualities he's suppressed his entire life. It's not smooth, it's not pretty, and it doesn't feel romantic. What's happening in him? He's actively working on anima integration, maybe through therapy, maybe through creative practice, maybe through spiritual work, maybe just through allowing himself to feel. He's developing emotional capacity, learning to identify and express feelings, learning to trust intuition, learning to be vulnerable without collapsing. But this development is threatening to his ego's structure. His identity has been built on not having these qualities. Now he's cultivating them. Who is he if he's not the controlled, rational, emotionally distant man he's always been? Identity crisis, his behaviors, inconsistency. Some days he's emotionally available. Other days he regresses to old patterns. This isn't manipulation. It's genuine struggle between old identity and emerging one. Increased intimacy. When he successfully integrates even small amounts of anima, intimacy deepens dramatically. He's actually present, actually feeling, actually connecting. Frustration. He's frustrated with how hard this is. I don't know who I am anymore. This feels impossible. Less magic. The relationship feels less intensely romantic. Projection is dissolving. Reality is emerging. This feels like loss to him, and possibly to you. Testing your consistency. He needs to know you're not going anywhere while he does this difficult work. He'll unconsciously test whether you'll abandon him in his messiness. What he's thinking: who am I without my old defenses? Is she going to leave me if I'm not always strong, controlled, certain? Is this transformation worth the pain? Will she still want me when I'm not the idealized version she projected onto me? Your response, do. Remain absolutely consistent. You're not his therapist, but you're the ground he's standing on while he rebuilds. Maintain your boundaries while celebrating his growth. Acknowledge progress without making it about you. I see you accessing real vulnerability. That's powerful. Don't. Rescue him from the difficulty. Make his struggle about your needs. Finally, you're opening up to me. Get scared by the loss of magic and try to recreate projection-based intensity. Waver in your sovereignty. The key, this stage determines whether transformation is real or performative. If you collapse here, either by trying to mother his process or by leaving because it's not romantic anymore, you sabotage everything. Many relationships fail in stage 3. The woman gets impatient waiting for his integration. Or she gets scared when projection dissolves and tries to recreate drama. Or she abandons sovereignty to help him through the struggle. All of these sabotage his development in your relationship. If you maintain your stance, grounded, boundaried, invitational, through his messiest struggles, something remarkable happens. He integrates. Not completely. Integration is lifelong work, but enough that the relationship transforms fundamentally. Stage 4, the individuation partnership. If you make it through stage 3 together, you enter something rare. Genuine individuation partnership. What's happening? Projection has largely dissolved. You're not his anima anymore. He's developing his own. You're not completing his fragments. You're two whole people choosing mutual growth. This is fundamentally different from earlier stages. His behaviors, authentic choosing. He's choosing you from wholeness, not need. He doesn't need you to access emotions, creativity, or depth. He's developed his own. He wants you because you catalyze ongoing growth. Reciprocal support. He's now capable of supporting your individuation, not just having you support his. He challenges your growth, reflects your blind spots, holds space for your development. Emotional sovereignty. He can feel his own feelings without needing you to process them. He can self-soothe. He has internal emotional resources. Decreased drama. The relationship is less volatile. No more dramatic highs and lows of projection cycling, just steady depth. Increased appreciation. He experiences profound gratitude for what you catalyzed. Not you completed me, but you made my completion possible. What he's thinking. I can't believe who I'm becoming. She didn't save me. She showed me how to save myself. I'm choosing her every day, not because I need her, but because I want to keep growing with her. I was half alive before, now I'm actually living. Your experience. This stage feels qualitatively different from earlier ones. Less exhausting. You're not carrying his emotional life anymore. He has his own resources, more spacious. You don't have to maintain rigid boundaries because he respects them naturally. Deeper intimacy. Without projection, you're meeting the real him, and he's meeting the real you. Mutual growth. He's now capable of catalyzing your development too. The relationship serves both people's individuation. Less romantic, more real. The projection-based magic is gone. But something deeper has replaced it. Chosen love, mutual respect, shared commitment to growth. The paradox. This stage is what you wanted all along, but it might not feel how you expected. It's less intense than early projection-based attraction, less dramatic, less swept away by destiny. It's grounded, stable, real. Some women get scared here. Did we lose something? Where's the passion? The passion hasn't disappeared. It's transformed. It's no longer projection-fueled intensity. It's reality-based depth. Your response. Do. Celebrate this transformation. Recognize that stable depth is more valuable than unstable intensity. Continue your own individuation work. This stage only sustains if both partners keep growing. Don't panic at the loss of drama and try to create artificial intensity. Get complacent and stop doing your own work. Make him responsible for maintaining the connection. It's mutual now. The key: this stage requires trust that real love is better than projected love, even when it feels less romantic by conventional standards. Stage 4 typically solidifies in the second year of relationship, but it only leads to the final stage if both partners remain committed to ongoing individuation. Stage 5, the soul bond. The final stage is what Jung called the transcendent function, when relationship becomes the container for both partners' lifelong psychological and spiritual development. This is rare, extremely rare. Most relationships never reach it. Many that reach stage 4 plateau there, which is still beautiful and valuable. But stage 5 is the ultimate possibility. What's happening? The relationship has transcended both projection and personal psychology. It's become a vessel for something larger: ongoing transformation, creative collaboration, spiritual evolution, contribution to the collective. Both partners are using the relationship as the primary context for their individuation work, not as the source of their wholeness, but as the optimal environment for developing it. His experience: devotion as gratitude. His love isn't need-based or even choice-based anymore. It's gratitude-based. She catalyzed my transformation. Our relationship is sacred. You're irreplaceable, not because you're perfect or because he couldn't survive without you, but because you were the specific catalyst for his specific transformation. That makes you uniquely valuable to his journey. Continued growth. He's not done integrating his anima. Integration is ongoing, but now the relationship itself facilitates that ongoing work. Service orientation. The relationship isn't just about personal fulfillment anymore. It's about what you can contribute together. Children, creative work, service to others, cultural healing, your experience. Beyond fear. You're not afraid of losing him or losing yourself. Both are secure because both are grounded in your individual wholeness. Creative partnership. The relationship generates something beyond itself. Art, children, ideas, projects, healing in others. Spiritual depth. Whether religious or not, the relationship has a transcendent quality. It connects you to something larger than personal happiness. Continuous revelation. You keep discovering new depths in him and in yourself. The relationship never becomes stale because both of you are continuously evolving. The soul bond characteristics. Jung identified specific qualities of relationships that reach this stage. Mutual individuation. Both partners prioritize their own and each other's psychological development over comfort or convention. Contained complexity. The relationship can hold contradiction, conflict, shadow without dissolving. You don't need to be perfect for each other. Transcendent purpose. The relationship serves something beyond the couple. Raising conscious children, creating meaningful work, modeling healthy partnership for others. Erotic vitality. Paradoxically, the sexuality often deepens in stage 5 because it's no longer just physical. It's a full soul meeting in the body. Separate together. Complete comfort with autonomy and intimacy simultaneously. Neither threatens the other. What he's thinking. This relationship is the most important thing I've ever done. I've become more myself than I knew was possible. I want to grow old with her, not just because I love her, but because our growth together is the point. She's my partner in becoming fully human. Your response: do stay humble. This achievement requires ongoing work from both of you. Continue your own individuation. The moment either partner stops growing, the soul bond weakens. Honor what you've created while remaining open to its continued evolution. Don't get inflated. We've arrived. Stop doing your inner work. Make the relationship an identity rather than a container. take the bond for granted. The key, stage 5, isn't a destination. It's an ongoing practice of mutual transformation. It lasts only as long as both partners remain committed to growth. The complete arc. Let's review the progression. Stage 1, weeks 1 to 3, projection crisis. He's attracted but confused. You maintain sovereignty. He tests, pursues, withdraws. Stage 2, months 1 to 3, recognition. He sees his own incompleteness reflected. You mirror without rescuing. He chooses integration or flight. Stage 3, months 3-9, integration struggle. He develops his anima. You remain consistent through messiness. Projection dissolves, reality emerges. Stage 4, year 1-2, individuation partnership. He's choosing from wholeness. You experience mutual growth. Real love replaces projected love. Stage 5, year 2+, soul bond relationship becomes sacred container. You both serve something larger. Love becomes lifelong transformation. Critical warnings. Not every man will complete this arc. Many flee at stage 1 or 2. Some attempt stage 3 but can't sustain it. Few reach stages 4 and 5. You cannot force progression. You cannot control his choices. You can only maintain your sovereignty and let the arc unfold or not. Your job isn't to make him transform. It's to remain so whole that transformation becomes his only option for staying, and to be completely okay if he chooses to leave instead. This is the hardest part. Watching a man face the choice between growth and comfort, knowing you cannot make the choice for him. But this is also what makes stage 5 so profound when it happens. He didn't transform because you manipulated him. He transformed because he chose to. And that choice, made freely, repeatedly over years, creates a bond that transcends anything projection-based love could create. Now, before we complete this journey, I need to show you the pitfalls that can sabotage even advanced stages of this work. Because understanding the arc isn't enough. You need to know the traps that can destroy everything you've built. You've learned the theory. You've seen the practice. You understand the transformation arc. But knowledge alone doesn't protect you from the 4 catastrophic pitfalls that destroy even sophisticated attempts at anima catalysis. Women who understand everything I've taught still fall into these traps, because these pitfalls are subtle, seductive. They disguise themselves as success. Let me show you what can still go wrong and how to avoid it. Pitfall 1, the Sophia inflation. This is the trap of spiritual superiority. You've done the work. You've integrated your animus. You've developed sovereign boundaries and individuated feminine presence. You've successfully catalyzed transformation in a man. And you start to believe you've arrived, that you're psychologically complete, that you're Sophia stage and everyone else is struggling at lower levels. This is Sophia inflation, mistaking psychological development for psychological completion. How it manifests. You become subtly judgmental of other women. They're still trying to please men. They haven't done their work. You feel superior to men. I can see their anima projections. They're so unconscious. You start teaching others from a place of, I've figured it out, rather than, I'm still learning. You lose humility. You forget that individuation is lifelong, not a destination you reach at 35 and maintain effortlessly. Why it's dangerous. The moment you think you've arrived, you stop growing. And the moment you stop growing, you start regressing. Your relationship, even if it reached stage 5, begins to stagnate because you're no longer doing your own work. You're resting on past achievements. The man who fell in love with your ongoing transformation notices you've stopped transforming. You've become static, and static, psychologically dead. The warning signs: you feel annoyed by other women's unconscious behavior. You believe you have special insight others lack. You've stopped engaging with your own shadow. You feel like you're teaching rather than exploring. Your partner's flaws bother you more than your own. You've become certain rather than curious. The correction: return to beginner's mind. Recognize that you know nothing, that every relationship is new territory, that individuation is endless. Find your own shadow, the parts of yourself you're still rejecting, the qualities you're still projecting, the growth you're still avoiding. Work with your own patterns. Stay humble. Remember that the moment you think you're Sophia, you've slipped back to Mary, spiritual pedestalization of yourself. True Sophia never claims to have arrived. She knows she's always becoming. Pitfall 2, the catalysis addiction. This trap is more insidious because it looks like success. You discover you're good at catalyzing men's transformations. You've done it once. You feel powerful, alive, purposeful, and you become addicted to being the catalyst. This is catalysis addiction, making your identity about transforming men rather than living your own life. How it manifests. You're attracted primarily to broken men with anima voids. I can help him become whole. You feel most alive when a man is in his integration struggle. The intensity is intoxicating. You define your value through being the woman who sees deeper, who understands masculine psychology, who catalyzes transformation. You unconsciously seek out men who need fixing so you can prove your power by transforming them. Why it's dangerous. You're using men's psychological work as a substitute for your own. Their transformation becomes your identity because you're avoiding your own development. This creates a perverse incentive. You need them to be broken so you can be the healer. You need them to be unconscious so you can be the awakener. And it keeps you in relationships with men who may never actually complete the transformation arc. You're addicted to the catalyzing, not committed to the partnership that follows successful integration. The warning signs. You're consistently attracted to emotionally unavailable men. You feel bored when a man is already psychologically developed. You derive more satisfaction from his growth than from your own. You collect transformation stories about men you've changed. You feel threatened by women who don't understand masculine psychology like you do. Your own individuation work has stalled while you focus on "is the correction." Redirect your focus to your own life. What are you creating? What are you building? What's your purpose beyond being a catalyst for men? Ask honestly, are you attracted to this man, or are you attracted to the project of transforming this man? Choose men who are already doing their work, who don't need you to wake them up, who are capable of meeting you, not just being fixed by you. Your purpose isn't to be the great awakener of sleeping men. It's to live your most authentic, creative, purposeful life and to partner with men who are doing the same. Pitfall 3, the premature merger. This is the most common trap and the most heartbreaking. Everything is working. He's integrating. You're maintaining sovereignty. The relationship is deepening. You're reaching stage 4 and you relax. We made it. I can let my guard down now. You begin to merge, to soften your boundaries, to make him more central to your identity. This is premature merger, collapsing sovereignty after initial success. How it manifests. You start accommodating his preferences. I don't need to maintain my separate activities. We like doing things together. You begin identifying as we more than I. Your decisions are about us rather than about your individual paths. You feel anxious when apart. You need his validation more than before. You start performing again. Your own individuation work takes a backseat. I've done enough work. Now I can focus on the relationship. Why it's dangerous. The anima catalysis that created deep love required your sovereignty. When you abandon that sovereignty, you abandon the very thing that made him capable of loving you deeply. He starts regressing. His anima integration stalls. He begins projecting onto you again because you're available for projection now. The relationship that reached stage 4 or 5 slides back to stage 1 or 2, but now it's worse because both of you know what's been lost. The warning signs: you feel uncomfortable spending time alone. You've abandoned hobbies, friendships, or interests. You're making decisions to please him rather than honoring your truth. You feel anxious about his mood or approval. You've stopped doing your sovereignty practices. You're afraid to express needs that might create distance. The correction: reinstate boundaries immediately. This isn't punishment or game playing. It's returning to the stance that created love in the first place. Reclaim your separate life. Spend time alone. Pursue your interests. Reconnect with friends. Do your practices. Communicate clearly. I notice I've been losing myself in us. I need to reclaim my autonomy. This isn't about you. It's about me remaining whole. If he's truly integrated, he'll understand and support this. If he resists, he's revealing he preferred your merged state because it allowed him to avoid continued integration. Either way, you get critical information, and you reclaim the sovereignty that makes genuine love possible. Pitfall 4: the shadow denial. The final trap is the most sophisticated. You're focused on his anima integration. You're maintaining boundaries. You're doing your practices. Everything looks healthy, but you're avoiding your own shadow work. You're focusing on his development while refusing to face the darkness in yourself. This is shadow denial, using spiritual relationship work to avoid your own psychological darkness. How it manifests: you can see his projections clearly but remain blind to your own. You notice his defensiveness, his fear, his control issues, but you don't examine your own. You frame everything in terms of his integration needs without asking what you're avoiding in yourself. You present as the evolved partner while he's the one doing the work, unconsciously maintaining superiority. Why it's dangerous? Your unexamined shadow will sabotage even perfect technique. You might be doing everything right consciously, but unconsciously manipulating for control, validation, or to avoid your own wounds. Men's unconscious systems detect this. Even if consciously he believes you're genuinely sovereign, his unconscious knows you're performing sovereignty to avoid facing yourself. The relationship develops a subtle falseness, surface-level health, hiding deeper inauthenticity. The warning signs: you can articulate his psychological issues easily, but struggle to name your own. You feel consistently more conscious than him. Your shadow qualities appear only in projection onto others. You're focusing on relationship work to avoid other life challenges. You get defensive when he points out your patterns. You haven't done your own therapeutic work while expecting him to do the correction. Get radically honest about your own shadow. What are you avoiding? What qualities do you judge in him that you possess yourself? Where are you controlling, manipulative, fearful, needy? Do your own therapeutic work, not couples therapy to fix the relationship, individual therapy to face yourself. Ask him, what am I refusing to see about myself? Where do you experience me as inauthentic? And have the courage to hear the answer without defensiveness. True anima catalysis requires two individuating people. If you're focused only on his development while avoiding your own, you're not in genuine partnership. You're in spiritual bypassing disguised as conscious relationship. Resolution: Heinrich's ending. Remember Heinrich, the banker who fell into transformative love after E showed him his soul. Let me tell you how his story ended. Heinrich worked with Jung for 2 years. He integrated his anima enough to experience genuine emotions, develop creative expression, and form authentic relationships. He eventually married Maria, the artist. They had 3 children, but the story doesn't end there. Decades later, when Heinrich was in his 60s, Jung interviewed both Heinrich and Maria for his research on long-term relationships. Jung asked Heinrich, "What made the difference?" Why did this relationship work when all your previous ones failed? Heinrich's answer was striking. Maria wasn't the woman I fell in love with. E was. But Maria was the woman I could actually love. E showed me my soul. But Maria lived with me while I developed it. Jung asked Maria the same question from her perspective. Maria said, I never tried to be what E was to him. I knew about E. Heinrich told me the story early on. I knew he'd been shaken by her, but I didn't try to recreate that experience. I just lived my life, did my work, and let Heinrich do his. Jung noted that both had continued their individuation throughout the marriage. Heinrich had become an artist in addition to his banking career. Maria had published several books. They'd raised children who were themselves psychologically sophisticated. And here's the critical observation. Neither Heinrich nor Maria claimed to have arrived. Both described ongoing work, ongoing growth, ongoing discovery of shadow material, and new potential. They'd been married 28 years when Jung interviewed them, and they were still individuating, separately and together. This is what stage 5 looks like in real life. Not perfection, not completion, but ongoing commitment to growth, individual and mutual, that sustains depth over decades. Jung wrote in his notes, this is the transformation that's possible when anima catalysis is followed by genuine partnership. Heinrich fell in love with his soul when he met E, but he learned to love a real woman with Maria. The first awakened him, the second sustained him. Both were necessary. The collective imperative. Jung believed that individual psychology has collective consequences. When one person individuates, it affects everyone they encounter. When a couple creates genuine partnership, it models possibility for others. This work, anima catalysis, individuation, genuine love, isn't just personal. It's cultural, political, spiritual. Modern culture is destroying itself through the masculine-feminine split. Men disconnected from their animas become tyrants, addicts, or empty shells. Women disconnected from their animus become martyrs, victims, or manipulators. The gender wars, the loneliness epidemic, the collapse of committed relationships, the rise of toxic masculinity and weaponized femininity. All symptoms of the same root problem. Men and women trying to complete themselves through each other instead of individuating themselves. Jung saw this in the 1920s. It's exponentially worse now, but here's what gives me hope. Every woman who does this work, who refuses to carry men's projections, who maintains sovereign boundaries, who catalyzes integration instead of enabling projection, is doing revolutionary work. You're not just fixing your relationship, you're healing the collective masculine-feminine wound. Every man who chooses integration over projection, who develops his anima instead of demanding women carry it, who grows through crisis instead of fleeing to comfort, is serving humanity's evolution. This is why Jung dedicated his life to this work. He understood that human consciousness evolves one relationship at a time. One integration at a time, one soul bond at a time. You think you're just trying to have a better relationship. You're actually participating in humanity's psychological evolution. That's not hyperbole. That's literally true. Every relationship built on genuine mutual individuation rather than projection capture is a light in the darkness, a model of what's possible, a transmission of hope that love can be real, not just projected fantasy. Final empowerment. So here's what you need to understand as we close. You cannot force a man to fall deeply in love. You cannot manipulate him into integration. You cannot perform sovereignty to trigger his transformation. You cannot make yourself into the perfect catalyst. All you can do, all you must do, is become completely yourself. Integrate your own animus, develop your own wholeness, maintain your own boundaries, live your own purpose, and from that wholeness you become a mirror that shows men their unlived souls. Some will see their souls and run. They'll choose comfort over growth, easy projections over difficult integration, and you'll let them go because you're not desperate for relationship. You're committed to truth. Some will see their souls and begin the work. They'll struggle through stage 3. Some won't make it. You'll compassionately release them because you're not attached to being their savior. You're inviting their sovereignty. And some, rare, precious few, will complete the integration arc. They'll transform from men seeking their souls in women's bodies into men who've found their souls in themselves. And they'll fall irreversibly, gratefully, deeply in love with you, not because you completed them, but because you made their completion possible. That love, born from transformation, sustained by mutual individuation, devoted to ongoing growth, is worth waiting for, worth working for, worth maintaining your sovereignty for. It's the deepest love possible between humans, and it begins with one subtle act, being so completely yourself that his soul has nowhere to hide, not trying to make him fall, not performing femininity, not carrying his projections, just being whole and trusting that your wholeness, your authentic, sovereign, individuated presence is the greatest gift you can offer any man ready to do the work of becoming whole himself. This is Jung's legacy. This is the path of anima catalysis. This is the love that transforms souls. Are you willing to walk it? Your next step, if this video resonated with you, if you recognize yourself in these patterns, if you're committed to doing this work, if you're choosing sovereignty over performance, leave a comment telling me which stage you recognize in your current or past relationships. Are you in the projection crisis, the recognition, the integration struggle? Are you dealing with an Eve, Helen, Mary, or Sophia stage man? And most importantly, which of the 4 pitfalls are you most vulnerable to? Your honest self-assessment is the first step toward genuine transformation. Subscribe to this channel to join others walking the path of psychological sovereignty and authentic love. We're creating a community of individuated feminine presence that's changing the culture one relationship at a time. Next video, we'll explore the shadow side of this work. What happens when you successfully catalyze a man's anima integration and he becomes more powerful than you expected? How to navigate the challenges of being with a truly integrated masculine, and how to ensure your own growth matches his so you don't become the obstacle to his continued evolution. Until then, stay sovereign, trust your wholeness, and remember, you're not trying to make him fall in love. You're making his soul evolution possible. That's when deep love becomes inevitable.